Hello, denizens of the night. Welcome to Carnophage. I am Ignacio Vitalis, and when I described the world of darkness as exploring, quote, a dark urban fantasy world where corporations run everything and politicians are bastards, except with additional bonkers reasons for these things, such as primordial forces hellbent on our destruction, I absolutely wrote that with Werewolf the Apocalypse in mind. Though it's not a game that I have had the fortune of playing, I have found its central conflict to be compelling enough for me to research it on my own time. It is simultaneously admirable and pitiful, and those feelings strengthen with time as a reflection of a real conflict, that of climate change and the ever-present greed that drives it. As a reference point, Vampire the Masquerade features a ton of internal conflict between sects and generations, while 5th edition further emphasizes external threats in the form of the Second Inquisition. You can run away from the consequences of breaching the masquerade that might come from kindred society, but mortal society is somehow even less merciful. Putting these two threats together establishes the chaos within the masquerade and the importance of upholding it, so you can really get that Sopranos end of an era feel with strong gothic stylings. The world of the Garou, on the other hand, is an active apocalypse, or at least on the brink of it. We see the benign failings of our society for the cataclysms that they are. The willful ignorance, the gleeful cruelty, the cowardice of the people who should help, and the brazenness of the worst people humanity has to offer, which is met with celebration. The trajectory of our species seems hell-bent on destruction, either because the people at the wheel either want to pillage the world for all it's worth, or they think that there is a light at the bottom of the spiral. Sometimes it's both, because the same intelligence that led them to these contradictory beliefs is the same intelligence that got us here in the first place. Whether it's the crushing institutions of capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, or the utterly inescapable force of climate change, recognizing each of these things for what they are can give way to bitterness or despair. As we hear more and more about these situations, and as they become more hopeless, we ask ourselves, when will we rage? Oh yeah, werewolves. So, while their war against cosmic entropy may be ultimately hopeless, in fact, very few of the conclusions presented in Time of Judgment Apocalypse suggest that Gaia ends up better by the end of its scenarios. That's mostly because the Garu's fight is hopeless by itself. Ours is more complicated, but not as exciting or straightforward, and certainly not as cathartic. That's what draws me and many others to this game, and a lot of creativity has been put into reinterpreting the banal horrors of our lives, or making the most of the world Werewolf presents, with the Umbra and the Garou tribes. As much has already been spoken of the Gaian tribes on this platform, I would like to turn the attention to the enemies that those tribes face. To this end, I will be primarily working off the 20th Anniversary and 5th Edition Core Rulebooks, along with the 20th Anniversary Book of the Wyrm and Wyrmtide for 5th Edition. I will also be pulling from the classic Guide to Pentax subsidiaries, the 20th Anniversary Pentax Indoctrination Handbook, and the Chronicle of the Black Labyrinth as a layer of cream on this milkshake. This is not at all a beginner video, and I will be presuming that you are at least familiar with the tribes, triads, and how the Umbra works. Even with the length of this video, this is also not an absolute look, and is not a substitute for reading those books yourself. Ask an old sea urge or Gaillard how we got into this mess in the first place, and they might tell the story of how the Weaver trapped the worm in its webs so that it could stop destroying its creations. Denied of its nature, it went mad and is now determined to destroy everything. If the sea urge was a Red Talon, they would tell you something about how the Garou of the past stopped treating humans like cattle that occasionally get hunted for fun, which allowed him to get comfortable trampling over Gaia like a doormat at a college party. To be honest, the Red Talons are probably a lot closer to the truth than most would like to admit. Permit me a hot take, one of quite a few in this video, when I say it is almost comforting to think that the severity of the current situation was a matter of gods so divorced from material reality that their nature is beyond Garou influence and not good ideas realized poorly by perfectly capable thinkers from both the Garou and humanity. Moving past dubious mythology, when the Impergian was dropped, the wild humanity established the Weaver civilization, and when the differences swelled out of control, the Wyrm delivered violence. The Garou more or less allowed these forces to develop freely. These spiritual reflections of everything that Triac cooked up from humanity's actions would be dealt with by the Garou. However, they were woefully ill-equipped to address everything thrown at them, no thanks to the pointless War of Rage, and they could never pull off a good course correction for humanity. In the face of Roman imperialism and its hostile expansion into the British Isles, which carried with it the Wyrm's taint, the Garu's most valiant tribe of the time, the White Howlers, executed a suicide mission to take on the Wyrm directly, and the outcome of that was somehow worse than an actual collective suicide. That is how he got the Black Spiral Dancers, which I will get to later, but this blunder was an omen of future perils. While the Garou kept playing whack-a-mole with their traitorous kin and the Wyrm's bane spirits, they couldn't handle the nightmares of feudalism, mercantilism, and colonialism. Hell, some Garou went along with those forces because it was easier to go with the flow than to try and start the Impergium again, and no one wanted to repeat the fate of the White Howlers. Not that the will to fight was the problem, they just needed to be smart about it, which is really weird in society as draconian as that of the Garou. For another curveball, the Garou managed to claim a massive victory against an immensely powerful Bane that was awakened in the New World, but not before the Wyrm, empowered by the suffering of colonialism, wiped out an entire Garou tribe, which was contributing to the active effort of keeping that Bane imprisoned. That victory spared Gaia a lot of suffering, but the Industrial Revolution was already underway. At this point, the situation was essentially fucked. That is how we go from the chaotic prehistory, somewhat banal Dark Ages, and wacky Wild West, to the dreadful apocalypse the Garou now face. Up until 5th edition, this is where the drama kicks off with some more minor details for the 20th century. As for 5th edition, we get the Ascendant Wyrm, which is a state of being only possible by humanity feeding it enough power to evolve. The fluctuating shapes of fate have arranged themselves into a spiral, and Gaia is now either incapacitated and irreversibly maimed, or outright dead. Previous editions have placed the game in the pre-apocalypse, but the world is now firmly in the opening hours of the apocalypse. I have heard the opinion that this game should be called Werewolf the Post-Apocalypse, but that foolishly suggests that things aren't going to get worse before they get better. For a quick side tangent, I have heard so many people say that if Gaia is dead, then what is the point of continuing to fight? With all due respect, if you believe that, you are weak and you will not survive the winter. Hell, long before 5th edition, the Prophecy of the Phoenix painted the bleakest possible future for the world, and 5th edition actively entertains the notion that Gaia can be brought back to life, even if the Shattered Nation largely doesn't believe that is possible. That is remarkably more hopeful than much of what we hear in previous editions, but we are also starting much lower. I have even heard the idea that this might be such a hopeful presentation of the threat of climate change that it borders on being dishonest or irresponsible, which I kind of completely understand. 5th edition had to deal with the fact that the Earth has been irreversibly warped by the effects of climate change and its corporate agents, and there are zero signs that our world is going to head in any better direction. The situation has only gotten worse since the release of 20th Anniversary Edition, and it can only go so far in depicting if you fight the right spirits, the world will get better, before it distracts from real solutions to the real problems it's trying to address. The game stands between wish fulfillment and trying to seriously explore the awful shit going on in our world. A lot of 5th edition materials make community building and organizing a key pillar to resisting, which makes sense that it's something that we can do as well. Even if the Garou are fucked and losing hope is completely reasonable, they have as much of responsibility as we do to not make the world a worse place. They don't need hope, they need rage, as do we. Anyways, it's looking pretty bad, and if there's some kind of esoteric spiritual battlefront for this problem, the Garou will be first in the fray. Unfortunately, this means battling an esoteric spiritual force, which is a proper can of worms. Either for simplified occult understandings or the Wyrm's own madness, which actually depends on which edition takes precedence in your chronicle, it is identified as having 3 distinct heads. This view is known as the Triadic Wyrm, and sees the spirit as being composed of the Beast of War, Eater of Souls, and Defiler, mirroring the Wild, Weaver, and Wyrm respectively. The Beast of War, also known as the Wyrm of Calamity, is indiscriminate, unrelenting destruction, and all the pain and terror sown in its wake. The Eater of Souls, also known as the Wyrm of Consumption, is the hunger that gnaws from within, always clamoring for more to take and more to devour at any cost. The Defiler, also known as the Wyrm of Corruption, is the internal desire to either destroy the self or others. This should not be mistaken with the act of destroying the self or others, which is the domain of the Beast of War, and that is how the Wyrm's triad completes itself until nothing remains. How significant these entities are, let alone the veracity of their existence, is almost entirely a matter of mythology. The traders of the Black Spiral Dancers offer up their fallen foes to the Beast of War. A businessman cutting up the flesh of his rival pays service to the Eater of Souls for guiding him to his meal. And the Garou, too late to intervene in the suicide of a comrade, curses the Defiler. While this view of the Wyrm is relatively common among those in the know, most of the changing breeds do not discriminate between different aspects of the Wyrm, even if they have different perspectives on it, or different names for the Wyrm. Below the Triadic Wyrm are more cohesive forces which I would consider closer to Celestines than Incarna in terms of power. The first of these spirits I will mention are the Elemental Wyrms. To prime one's understanding of these spirits, know that the Umbra is not a place of atoms. It is instead composed of air, fire, earth, and water, or at least that is how the Garou understands the composition of the Umbra. More esoteric elementals exist, but if they are elementals of a material substance, they likely spawn from one of the aforementioned elementals. When the Wyrm claims dominion, these base elements are corrupted to become smog, balefire, sludge, and toxins, which are each overseen by an elemental Wyrm, and between them are the associated banes. One factory spewing its chemical fumes spawns its horde of smog elementals, who then answer to the essence of smog or Wyrm of smog. Both names are valid here. Before cutting into this pie made of pure chemical runoff, most of these semi-Celestine level spirits have an Incarna underneath them, specifically known as a Maelgin Incarna, and I will speak of them here as well. In the case of these elementals, the associated Maelgin are simply the most powerful elementals of their associated element. The elemental Wyrms and their Maelgin Incarna are Hoga, the elemental Wyrm of smog. As I mentioned in my example, its domain is choking toxic gases, and its Maelgin Incarna is Lord Choke, which takes glee in asserting its suffocating presence, whether it's in fume-filled factories or arduous traffic jams. Firmus, the elemental Wyrm of balefire, the slightly archaic interpretation of radiation which burns, twists, and destroys whatever it comes into contact with. Its Maelgin Incarna is Lord Cairn, which savors the invisible flames of catastrophic nuclear accidents, which gives me the impression that it might be a little starved as of lately. Hrug, the elemental Wyrm of sludge, which is a bit difficult to simply explain, as it ranges from the kind of sludge produced by chemical waste to actual human shit. You will know its influence when you see and or smell it. Its Maelgin Incarna is Lord Column, a being made of raw sewage which dwells in every sewer where pure sludge coalesces freely. If you ever wanted to fight the Great Mighty Pooh in your Werewolf Chronicle, here you go. And lastly, Waksha, the elemental Wyrm of toxins, every substance that poisons a body to destroy it from the inside out before the victim knows what is happening to them. This even includes alcohol and common street narcotics, not just cyanide and the like. Its Maelgin Incarna is Lady Yule, who possesses great knowledge and creativity which she uses to create and spawn monsters. She actually has Lord Column as a consort who fertilizes her eggs and adopts some of her creations. Making up the larger portion of the Wyrm's most powerful spirits are the Urge Worms, which are closer to Incarna than Celestines, and are believed to be the Wyrm's desires or thoughts manifested as powerful spirits. Though primordial as even animals can express a lot of what Urge Worms embody, humanity has a unique capacity to exert the forces that make up the Urge Worms. Systematic genocide, propaganda campaigns, and tyranny are uniquely human, and that is where the Urge Worms get their Maelgin Incarna from. Some humans embody the associated aspect so much that they transform into a Maelgin Incarna. However, only one individual is permitted to hold the position for a single Urge Worm. These entities, both the Urge Worms and to a lesser extent their Maelgin Incarna, are on par with the patron spirits of the Garou tribes, and while the Black Spiral Dancers remain firmly Whippoorwills or Bats tribe depending on your edition, a hive or pack might follow an Urge Worm's associated theology. The same can be said about Pentax with their allegiance to fly, and the many disorganized but knowledgeable worm cults, but I am getting ahead of myself. It should be noted that not all Urge Worms have a Maelgin Incarna beneath them. It is believed that the Urge Worms aligned with the Defiler Worm are so in sync with the worm's nature that Maelgin Incarna would only serve to dilute its nature, which is why it has so few. This belief does not address why some of the other Urge Worms lack Maelgin Incarna. However, perhaps it is only a matter of time before someone takes the mantle. For the Beast of War, the associated Urge Worms are Angu, Urge of Cruelty, is rumored to have been the last of the urges that spawned once the worm became deranged enough to revel in its destruction. If it causes pain, Angu smiles in delight, and so does its Maelgin Incarna, Lady Ife. As a mortal, she was a torturer for the Spanish Inquisition, which is kind of obviously anachronistic, but anyways, she is now an ethereal woman who wields jagged shards of glass as weapons. She pushes others to be cruel and takes out her sadism on those too weak to comply. Bashkai, the urge of violence, is perhaps so primordial that it is difficult to imagine it with complexity. If anything impedes it, then it will be met with violence, and nothing but violence. Its Maelgin Incarna, the Hellbringer, was once a Viking warrior who keeps his status as undefeated in battle, and now commands the highest war efforts of the Wyrm. In a dozen arms he carries different weapons, and one of them is a crossbow that compels those shot by it to attack one another. I should note here that the Hellbringer is at times attributed as the Maelgin Incarna of the Beast of War itself, a concept seen in the classic World of Darkness along with 5th edition, and we'll see another situation like this again later. Gree, Urge of Despair, smothers all desire until those under its sway kill themselves, preferably out of pure neglect. Gree is particularly loathed by the Garou as the supposed source of Hirano, and this hatred extends to its Maelgin Incarna, the Nameless Angel. It almost exclusively appears when it can give suicidal individuals a final push, and any other manifestations are met with absolute despair. And Phobok, the Urge Worm of Fear, has dominion over the impulsive and irrational, where it can reinforce destructive behaviors. Unfortunately, the only fear I'm feeling is that there is really nothing more I can say about this one. For the Eater of Souls, the associated Urge Worms are Sikra, Urge of Paranoia, has a presence that persists long after Phobok's fear takes its toll, and fuels self-centered fears. The Wyrm could thank Sikra more than any other urge for its continued supremacy, as Paranoia sparked the War of Rage, and now keeps the Garou from becoming meaningfully organized. The unfortunate embodiment of such an emotion is the Maelgin Incarna, the Archbishop of Madness, who bears a ring made from a tumor. He forces those he comes across to kiss the ring, which sends them into complete insanity. Kalub, Urge of Indulgence, is not well understood beyond its fundamental nature. Its influence fluctuates between hedonism and the desire to wallow in one's own filth. Whether that's questionable writing or a testament to how mysterious Kalub is, I will leave that for you to decide. Its male gene Incarna, Knight Entropy, is equally mysterious. It appears as a knight riding on horseback whose gaze and touch rots all that it comes into contact with. Vorus, Urge of Greed, is that classic mindset of I want everything at all costs. That ravenous desire is spelt out in the name, but the greed doesn't necessarily need to be material, and covers the power-hungry as well. Letharg, Urge of Apathy, consumes whatever despair fails to take. After all, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Its support can often prove a liability for the Wyrm's forces, unless its influence can be turned on their enemies. Also, its male gene Incarna, the slime-covered corpse known as the Therifuge, was the real-life Nazi scientist Josef Mengele, but he was recast as some pollution enthusiast in 20th Anniversary's Book of the Wyrm. I talk a bit more about this in the first part of the World of Darkness iceberg. This is the other male gene Incarna that is attributed to a head of the Wyrm, in this case the Eater of Souls, in the classic World of Darkness along with 5th edition. For the Defiler, the associated urge worms are Abhorra, the urge of hatred, turns paranoia into burning resentment that turns self-loathing inside out. Its male gene Incarna, the Duke of Hate, was a conquistador in life, and he pays special attention towards monolithic prejudices and acts of revenge. Occasionally, he will lead the Wyrm's armies into battle, covered in blackened armor with a grotesque mask while riding on horseback. Karnala, the urge of desire, gives no consideration to consequences when it takes what it pleases. Where the urge Wyrm of greed might attest taking a chance on something that imperils its wealth, the urge Wyrm of desire barrels through any risk to act on those desires. It might be easier to think of desire as lust with this urge worm. Its male gene Incarna is the Countess of Desire, supposedly a courtesan of the Abbasid Caliphate. She is somewhere between a succubus and siren. Everyone sees her differently, and her promises are specific to anyone she comes across, but no one has significance to her beyond their capacity to act on their desires. Swelak, the Urge of Lies, gains power not just from basic deception from one person to another, but also from hypocrisy and those who lie to themselves. The greater the impact of the lie, the better. Its surprisingly modern male gene Incarna is Corruption's Advocate, a slimy man in a suit with a serpent's tongue surrounded by a storm of contracts. He enjoys pushing honest men in power into destructive dishonesty. And lastly, Mastrak, the Urge of Power, embodies both the lust for power and the desire to exert it whenever possible. It is a patron of emperors, tyrants, and backstabbers, and its nature is so close to that of the Wyrm that its influence persists in every Bane, Fomor, and Black Spiral Dancer. That's all very scary. 16 shitty gods answering to a shitty trinity, but any encounter between them and the Garou is the stuff of legends, including those not yet told. Their reckoning may come if the Garou prove resolute, but in the meantime, these entities dwell in the Shenty of Malpheus, the ultimate domain of the Wyrm. Since I don't have much artwork to show here, I hope you don't mind the occasional screenshot from one of the new Doom games. Malpheus is a hellscape as chaotic as the domains of the wild and a million times more horrifying. Chemically polluted wastelands wind into infernal temples, among them the Black Spiral Labyrinths, where the White Howlers were shattered and saw betrayal as the only reasonable choice. The Garou see this realm as the destination of all that will rot, not as a cemetery, but as a dumping ground before entropy finally takes its toll. It is here where the urges and elementals reign supreme, and anything that enters Malpheus is at the mercy of these forces. Very few who enter return alive, as they are either quickly overwhelmed and captured, or broken by the sights of Malpheus. This mental degradation gives way to corruption, and even if someone escapes Malpheus, the realm will call out to them by marking their body and soul. If this corruption is not cleansed, a Garou might give in to the desire to betray Gaia, if only out of madness. However, this spiritual insanity can simply reduce someone into perpetual hunger and delirium. Those who dwell permanently in Malpheus are either slaves or committed to the eternal conflict of this realm. Many urges find themselves in conflict with one another, so they send out their loyal Banes, Black Spiral Dancers, and even mortal slaves to do battle. The results of these battles have left Malpheus carved up into several duchies, which keep the horrors of this realm loosely organized. The Wyrm is far too alien to concern itself with something like this, and a single nameless Black Spiral Dancer blessed by the Wyrm oversees the eternal war of Malpheus. They claim dominion over the Central Duchy, and they rule from the Castle Cassonas, a twisted obelisk hosting innumerable dungeons, which is more of a mass torture facility than an actual castle. They only ever leave to perform sermons at a cathedral in the middle of the Central Duchy. It is the only place of peace among factions in Malpheus. However, ritual sacrifices are made during every sermon, and the remains are left to hang from the ceiling in iron cages. Nearby is a wild fount that functions almost like a reactor for Malpheus. These umbral structures connect directly to the pure chaos realm of Flux, and in Malpheus, its denizens rely on it to create new terrors for the Wyrm. They had to essentially contain the wild fount, as should it be left to its own devices, the chaos of the Flux realm would spill forth and wreak havoc on Malpheus. Its essence must be corrupted and filtered before it can be dispersed throughout Malpheus, and it's this kind of liquid nightmare shit that makes up the rivers of this realm. Further out from the Central Duchy is the humble Temple of Skira, which is adorned with several decorations honoring the deeds of the Black Spiral Dancers, because this structure connects directly to the Black Spiral Labyrinths, though it is not the only route to that place. The labyrinth is unsurprisingly impossible to confidently map out, but it supposedly has 9 circles, and to not lose focus, I will not detail them here, and point to the first edition book of the Wyrm, which goes into some detail about them. 20th Anniversary did not bother, as it presented the labyrinth as instantly and irreversibly corrupting anyone who enters, while 5th edition presents it as both physically and mentally dangerous, but not instantly corrupting. As the focus of the most horrible of Garou legends, the secrets of the Black Spiral Labyrinth really are something best left in the hands of a storyteller. On the edge of the Central Duchy is the Nightmare Garden, which is simple enough. It's a garden that operates on nightmare logic. Nearby are the rooms of Reason and Unreason, sealed behind 2 innocuous doors. The Room of Reason contains texts in every format imaginable, full of devious and effective plans. To act on these plans is to allow the Wyrm into one's soul, so relying on them is somewhat ill-advised. The Room of Unreason is an ever-changing and abstract gallery, and those who take the time to study the art pieces gain profound but maddening insights. The Central Duchy is surrounded by a massive stone wall, and the wastelands beyond are divided among the Maelgin and Karna, who have created their own hells within Malpheus. If you understand a Maelgin and Karna, you can guess as to what's going on in their duchy, whether it's the bureaucratic and dishonest offices of Corruption's Advocate, or the eternal battlefield of the Hellbringer. To not throw off this section in the same way I could have done so for the Labyrinths, the 20th Anniversary Book of the Wyrm lays out each one of the 12 or so duchies. I think there's 12 of them. This whole hellish realm of Malpheus is the heart of the problem, and not quite what most Garou concern themselves with. Incursions into Malpheus have become more common as a necessity, but the Garou more often deal with its emanations in the Umbra and its supporting structures in the real world. These footholds of the Wyrm are known as columns, which have to develop from such powerful concentrations of entropy that the Umbra consolidates it into its own realm without a firm material reflection, like a shadow growing autonomy. These concentrations are split into 2 types, with the more or less formal names of blights and hellholes. Blights are concentrations of psychological stress, such as prisons, slums, and ruthless criminal enterprises. Hellholes are concentrations of material entropy, such as toxic waste dumps, nuclear test sites, and abandoned grocery stores. If you know, you know. Garou rarely have the means to unravel the sources of entropy on the material level, such as shutting down prisons or pushing for proper waste disposal, but they can at least stop blights and hellholes from growing out of control and turning into callums. Individuals actively serving the Wyrm can certainly try to make the problems that create blights and hellholes worse, and that is something the Garou try to address. The existence of a junkyard might embody the Wyrm, but if it's just a place that children use to play in, then that's not of the Garou's concern. If a company is dumping their shit on a perfectly healthy forest, then it does become their problem. A few callums have existed for so long and were fed by more esoteric elements that they have become their own realms of legend. These far callums are so powerful that they connect directly to Malpheus. Reflecting the worst aspects of the Industrial Revolution, Scar is a realm that ancient Garou couldn't have possibly imagined, and some see it as the ultimate testament to their failure. Anyone who enters this realm unprepared would be overwhelmed by the dark skyscrapers, endless gridlock, and noxious fumes before any bane gets to them. Pitiful spirits work regularly until they drop dead, where they are then fed upon by banes. The Wyrm servants who dare to travel through Scar can take a train to Malpheus. However, this train always leaves full and arrives empty, as it primarily serves to transport slaves and sacrifices to Malpheus. From the brutality of the Impergium to the genocide of the present day, and every violation between, the Atrocity Realm remembers them all. Here, they play out on repeat for eternity. It is the worst possible interpretation of the dustbin of history, and it has served as a place for demented meditation or even investigation, as the recreations of the Umbra can provide details that the perpetrators might have tried to hide. There is even a grand library where all atrocities are documented in archives in excruciating detail. However, it would be bold for any Garou to think they are welcome with open arms here. Atrocity Realm can lead to Malpheus, though the toll is far more psychological than physical compared to the passive entry in Scar. Far above Malpheus are the Wyrm reaches, formed by the more cosmic manifestations of entropy, such as dying stars and planets utterly devoid of life, so most of them. The Banes up here are pretty weird, dare I say alien, but they are in charge of the umbral pathways that allow easy transportation to and from Malpheus. Unfortunately, for even the Wyrm servants, most of the Banes here would sooner eat them than actually permit safe passage. The Abyss is a realm that may very well deserve a video in its own right. However, it is associated with the Wyrm and does connect to Malpheus. At the edge of this realm is a cliff marked with several exposed tunnels, which are inhabited by servants of the Wyrm, but these can connect to Malpheus. The realm itself, however, is of ultimate annihilation, only navigable due to the surrounding masses such as that cliff. Nothing that goes into the Abyss ever returns, but the few legends of things coming out of the Abyss are horror stories. There are many more legends of creatures that will emerge from the Abyss in the near future. This realm may be the maw of the Wyrm itself, or perhaps when the Wyrm has consumed all that is and all that ever will be, the Abyss too will devour the Wyrm, and leave the universe barren and silent for eternity. Before I move on, I will note that at the time of writing, nothing about Malpheus and callums has made it into 5th edition, even in the Wormtide and Moonlit Path source books, though Malpheus is still mentioned in the reprint of the Chronicle of the Black Labyrinths. I suppose I can attribute this to the game putting less emphasis on the Umbra and the solutions it presents in favor of material solutions, or the more speculative idea that they just don't want to introduce yet another take on realms such as Malpheus. But it leaves the Umbra as presented in 5th edition feeling a lot less interesting than previous versions. The Moonlit Path shows that the writers of Paradox's White Wolf can write something interesting with the Umbra realms, but they simply chose not to bring back the old ones that I'm talking about here. Instead, there is the generic Wyrmlands modifier whenever players enter a space where the Wyrm has dominion. To look on the bright side though, I think this gives room for storytellers to rethink what the final battles should look like for their chronicles. Perhaps Malpheus feels a bit too much like a Christian hell, which is an opinion I personally hold, and you might prefer something much more cosmic, in which case you have more free reign to do so with 5th edition, but to know that you're almost entirely on your own there. Now that the Wyrm's umbral presence is understood from top to bottom, along with its many clashing agendas, I would like to turn our attention towards the most fundamental of the Wyrm's servants. Bane generally refers to any juggling spirit of the Wyrm that acts against Gaia according to the Garou. This easily leads to a lot of foolishness, as the Garou might be tempted to go to war against entropy itself and curse the Wyrm when their bread is found to have mold. But this is why, unless it's spiraling out of control, the Gaffling level problems need to be looked past. The Garou must avert the apocalypse, not put an end to entropy. Destroying the Maelgen and Karna, exterminating the Black Spiral Dancers, and putting companies like Pentex out of business are all achievable, will significantly turn the tides in favor of Gaia, and are part of the current agenda. Obviously, getting there is going to take a lot of work, and it is the Banes that are really making the Garou work for their ultimate goals. As I said in the intro, I am assuming that you already understand how the Umbra and Spirits work, along with a cursory understanding of Omori. For the regularly scheduled 5th edition footnote, it presents some spirits of the Wyrm that have no interest in working with Banes, and have no more animosity towards the Garou than most spirits already do. A lot of Wyrm spirits, Bane or not, also could not care less about the Wyrm, and would rather ensure that their heap of trash remains undisturbed, but they will answer to superior spirits who may share the Wyrm's all-consuming hunger. This also means that the problem of Banes is a lot less organized than some Garou might think, and many Banes do not like each other at all. A man whose sibling was killed by local gangsters is the subject of a vicious debate between a spirit of despair, a spirit of paranoia, and a spirit of rage. These low-level umbral manifestations probably should not concern the Garou, but the more coordinated efforts by humans can be the product of severe callousness or cruelty. The Umbra spits out the corresponding spirits, and once these things start to mingle, which they rarely do but it happens, then the matter of petty Wyrm spirits or Banes is settled, and the Garou must step in. If the coordination between the spirits and humans are deliberate, then the situation becomes far more urgent. Anyways, though Bane possession most often amplifies what is already present in their host, particularly powerful Banes can push through their host's nature to manipulate it as they please. When the possession goes on for too long, at least a few days, the entities merge to become a Fomor. There can be many reasons for this, and it's not always a moral failing by the host. Many humans have their will broken by life circumstances, and as they spiral, the Bane capitalizes on that for an easy possession. Some are neglected by the people in their life, and even though there were warning signs that they were changing for the worse, no one intervened. Animals do not often become Fomori, but they can do little to resist long-term possession. Most hosts were probably bastards long before they became Fomori, but many weren't. Much like the Garou's primary goal when addressing Banes, they have to ensure that Fomori aren't created in the first place. Now that we are on the same page, I would like to take you on a quick tour through Banes, and if applicable, the Fomori they might create. Quick might not be the right word, but it won't be exhaustive because I have 2 simple rules. If there is art for me to show, I will probably talk about it. If the Bane or Fomor is also kind of cool, that's even better. Also, 20th anniversary doesn't give much for how Banes manifest when possessing, but I'll do my best. Now, I would like to present to you the Freak Legion. Whenever little smog elementals get out of hand, the choking lords let their truly suffocating presence get to their heads. These flocks of smoky birds are proud and boastful to the point of outright lying and annoying their fellow Banes. They might just be incapable of shutting up, and they comment on everything without an ounce of respect, but why should they spare any respect? You require air to breathe and they do not, which proves their superiority. Though intangible and unwilling to possess anything that is identical to them in nature, such as a cloud of suffocating gases, They will easily give away information that they really shouldn't, and much like fans of anything you don't like, they are also fatally allergic to clean water. A deadly ambush predator of the Umbra, the Dratosi spawn from concentrations of pollution where they burrow into small layers and emerge only to attack unfortunate passerbys. They typically set up lures or conceal themselves as benign garbage, which double as their preferred hosts for possession. Though their image might be that of an alien crab, they are no mere crustaceans. The Dratosi are infamously resilient, lethal, and a lot more intelligent than one might think. Even a single Dratosi possessing a large garbage heap is going to leave its mark on a pack of Garou, but its intelligence might be worth taking note of if a less violent solution could benefit all parties involved. Simple-minded spirits of murder, eviscerators mostly try to push humans into committing murder in the most excessive manner possible. The whole subject morbidly fascinates eviscerators, who torture not out of sadism but curiosity. In the age of Apocalypse, eviscerators have found increasing demand from Black Spiral Dancers as frontline skirmishers or trackers that are both expendable and capable. If murder is the end goal, there are unsurprisingly few better spirits to get it done. Their preferred hosts for possession are active serial killers, ideally ones who favor bladed weapons, and this is one way that the twisted slashers are created. Relentless human-shaped predators with a hand permanently shaped into a weapon. For something no less violent, but more brutish, the Halash are mighty acid spirits, burning through everything in their path for the crime of purity. They are as massive as a Garou in Krynos form, with skin that appears bleached and claws that can be coated with acid, capable of burning right through their hide. They might not be the most enthusiastic possessors, as acid spills are far from common even when you account for industrial negligence. Their strains are thought out, and if the servants for the Wyrm can conscript them into service, there are few better allies for battling the Garou specifically. Whenever a Fomor is struck down, some remnants of its essence are set adrift in the Umbra. It's entirely possible that this mass will be quickly eaten by a local bane. However, sometimes the urge form of despair takes notice and reshapes them into a phantasmus. These ghosts of Fomori skulk in the darkness, occasionally possessing inanimate masses to take the shape of their past Fomor and attack. But they hope to one day find a new long-term host and be whole again. Until then, it's a confusing state of existence, and while they are certainly dangerous, the Phantasmi are notoriously unstable and even less reliable. But a few cunning Garou have been able to work around their mood swings to outsmart them or make use of them as allies of convenience. The collective tyrannical desires that drive prejudice, such as the wanting to see women in the kitchen, men of color working in fields, and queer people in conversion camps, can push people to organize, and that is when an obscenity is born. This repulsive amount of flesh constantly rises, caressing and attacking itself in equal amounts. When its moans and screams echo through the gauntlet, the hateful have their emotions reinforced, which can push them into sudden acts of violence. Any resulting from Mori may appear completely unchanged, preaching hate like gospel, and erupting into a mass of frenzied limbs and screaming mouths when backed into a corner. So, 1st edition has the Orloths as individually powerful predators of the Umbra, and 5th edition presents them as pack predators, which I find more interesting as it gives them a more unique purpose in the Chronicle, so that is what I will focus on here. Anyways, mob justice might have had its place in lawless lands. However, that kind of social movement can give way to uncontrolled rage that brutally punishes any perceived infraction. The Weaver claims dominion over proper legal systems, while the spirits of mob rule fell to the Wyrm to become the Urlas. These strange dinosaur-like hounds are rarely ever seen alone and operate in perfect synchronicity with one another. Rather than possessing individuals, Orloth packs collectively possess mobs of humans in search of anything that even slightly displeases them, while reflecting the uncanny unity of the Urlas. Another kind of spirit once aligned to the Weaver, Rodbeams feed to the gradual decay of structures while occasionally giving the process an occasional shove. Appearing in the Umbra as some form of massive decaying hardware such as a crane, not all structures are buildings. and anything that threatens it can have their own weaknesses identified and exploited in battle. The Rot Beam is defenseless by itself, but it can enlist the aid of lesser Banes, and while possessing a building, it can manipulate its form to create some unfortunate accidents. If it's ever feeling ambitious, it might possess an arsonist or vandal to more directly aid in the structure's destruction. Should the possession go on for too long, the host becomes a saboteur, with a body made of flesh and metal, capable of vomiting a powerful acid and tearing through any inanimate structure in its way with its bare hands. Spirits of biological decay that often pledge their service to an elemental worm, the Rotwalkers are little more than zombies with some worm-aligned element flowing through them. While their spirit form is particularly monstrous, either as a fusion of corpses or elemental centipedes depending on the version you follow, they exclusively possess corpses which can easily turn into Fomori, known as putrid remnants. In all forms, they can channel their imbued elements in attacks, such as unleashing scorching radiation in their bites, or coughing up clouds of suffocating smog. Even though they act as simple shambling corpses, they have some intelligence, and will use it if it can serve to harm their opponents, such as possessing the corpses of kinfolk to turn against the Garou. While it is no easy feat for a pattern spider to become corrupted by the Wyrm, the intervention of Black Spiral Dancers and the Urge Room of Power are more than enough to put them on their side. These fallen Weaver spirits have been realized in two very different ways. First are the Rust Spiders, who can reinforce the local gauntlets in such a way that it still allows for their fellow Banes to pass through with ease. Second are the Mace Tree, which use their intellect of their past nature to take positions of authority either among fellow Banes or humans, when they choose to take a host. Unlike other Banes who claw for positions of power, the Mace Tree are cold-blooded and don't mind sharing their station with equals, most often Black Spiral Dancers or fellow Mace Tree. If they have no trick up their sleeves to have an advantage, they simply won't show themselves. Their possessions are subtle, with only the eyes taking the honeycomb shape of spider eyes, and are always part of diabolical agendas that will be taken care of by the many Banes and Fomori loyal to the Mace Tree. If you couldn't tell, I prefer the Mace Tree. Many of the Banes I have spoken of so far might keep to their own agendas, but it is the Scrags who are most willing to show up at the doorstep of your cairn with no plan, but ready to shove its foot up your ass. Scrags are the definitive goons, even more so than the Eviscerators or Rotwalkers, and spirits of simple physical violence who are drawn to violent people. Soldiers of fortune, heartless gangsters, and anyone who might be hitting their boiling point work well enough for a Scrag to take as a host. Their true form as pale, ghoulish fiends juts out from the Fomori they create with claws and barbs they can use as weapons, and such Fomori are a common form of infantry in any army of the Wyrm acting in the material world. Now, what's a missile without its guidance system, especially when Banes like the Mace Tree aren't at all plentiful? It is the humble Scryers who take charge of intelligence gathering, one of the few worm-aligned Gafflings that are dangerous enough to be unambiguously declared as Banes. They don't quite have a consistent appearance, such as that of a fly, bird, or floating eye, but they have an affinity for possessing anything associated with sight or vigilance. That might be as clear-cut as a security camera, but it can also include a peephole or a weak-willed sniper in a watchtower. Due to its obligations and low power, Scryers rarely stick around long enough to create Fomori. They might even stay in the Umbra, as they are capable of peering into the material world from the Umbra, which often leaves its targets clueless to their observation. Originally presented in the first edition Book of the Wyrm as Banes only dedicated to the creation of Fomori, Feeders were reintroduced in Wyrmtide as fallen faith spirits who proselytize in the name of the Wyrm. These decrepit priests, shamans, and politicians corrupt their fellow spirits in the Umbra, and when possessing human community leaders, they manipulate their followers into becoming more amenable for Bane possession. If given the chance, they even try to convert Garou into becoming Black Spiral Dancers. While they might not always be successful, their words can prove powerful enough to at least demoralize them, and there is even a legend that it was a cedar that convinced the White Howlers into storming the Black Spiral Labyrinths. Successful cedars make for fearsome leaders in the Wyrm's war. commanding Banes, Fomori, and even some Black Spiral Lancers who show almost uncharacteristic loyalty to the Theater. When the Weaver's worker spirits meet the reality of awful working conditions, they can be gradually corrupted into becoming Vigesti, as busy bees become pissed off wasps. They are mostly a nuisance, sticking to their disgusting hives. However, they can possess humans with their souls broken by banal but brutal working conditions, such as that of an Valmore fulfillment center. The resulting Fomori can only be described as husks, walking Vigesti hives armed with a nasty stinger and insectile wings that allow for flight. Long ago, when the Weaver formed the Gauntlet, the Wild responded by creating passageways that would allow spirits to safely pass through it, and they had some intelligence so they could operate as needed. Once the Wyrm became hostile, it would corrupt these tunnels to its own ends, and as wormholes, they now violently breach the Gauntlet so that Banes can enter the material world. These are essentially one-way doors for anything that doesn't have the means to enter the Umbra, but most spirits know how to materialize, and Banes have plenty of ideas on what to do once they're on the other side. The wormhole itself is almost like a dumb animal, incapable of consciously defending itself. However, they are valuable assets to the Wyrm's forces, who will be quick to defend a threatened wormhole. Very rarely will a wormhole possess an individual, and it almost never does so of its own volition. But these possessions, when they do happen, will end when it's time to make the breach as the host violently explodes. Also, this Bane was cool enough for me to improvise without any artwork. As half-spirit beings, even spirits of rage would struggle immensely to possess a Garou. It is an impossible feat for all but one type of Bane, the Howling Insanity. These Banes are the stuff of horror stories told around the moots. Even if they fail more often than they succeed in creating Fomori, if only because the Garou would sooner be killed or kill themselves before becoming one, the threat of possession is enough to make an Arun shudder. Appearing as a cloud of smoke with a faint resemblance to a Garou in Krynos form, the Howling Insanities either seek out those in the grips of Hoglosk or a frenzy, as they are most vulnerable. Black Spiral Dancers make for easier hosts, but one shouldn't expect such an exotic spirit to settle for a mediocre challenge. When the Garou becomes a Fomor, they are known as a Howling Shambler, a sickly Garou lost in its own mind until it's time to kill the servants of Gaia, or anyone who makes the mistake of taking pity on them. An ancient, immensely powerful, and ill-understood Bane, the Storm Eater is a single unique spirit that was imprisoned by the American Garou and broke free in 1830. The suffering of colonialism and genocide against the native people have been considered as contributing factors to its release, but the biggest one was probably the loss of the Croatan tribe that once existed alongside the Uktena and Wendigo, which aided those tribes in its efforts to keep Storm Eater contained. The ancient Bane would go on to devour and assimilate the spirit that was sent to imprison it, and would then rain terror upon the American frontier. Until its reinternment in 1890, the Storm Eater would command Banes to possess humans and animals alike to create its unique breed of Stormborn Fomori. Due to the Weaver spirit consumed by the Storm Eater, the Stormborn can suppress any signs of their wormish nature, and can even enter the Umbra without issue. This made them an insidious, almost mythical threat that caused a lot of trouble for the Garou. In 1890, 13 Garou, with one from each known tribe, assembled as the Two Moons Pact to perform the rite of Still Skies. This cost each of the Garou involved their lives, but the Storm Eater was imprisoned and all of its Stormborn were killed. The legend of the Two Moons Pact is recited to this day, though there is a lingering fear that there are more Stormborn out there, or that the binds on the Storm Eater will weaken and that it's only a matter of time before it rises once again. The Storm Eater was a major antagonist for the Wild West setting, but occasionally sees mentioned in books set in the Age of Apocalypse. Saving the worst for last, Nexus Crawlers are the most feared Banes even among the servants of the Wyrm. They are beasts of total chaos and alien intellect, spawned from the darkest depths of Malpheus whenever a great tragedy befalls either the material world or, more often, the Umbra. Though as spirits they may simply appear as an iridescent darkness floating in the air, they will take the shape of eldritch beasts in the Umbra, or rip apart the world around them in the material world to assemble a fitting form. From there, all hell breaks loose, as their each and every action breaks some part of reality. Foes can be turned inside out, into molten silver, into masses of screaming faces, set against each other, have their minds swapped, compelled to kill themselves, teleport into outer space, the bottom of the ocean, Malthus, the underworld, or simply struck by entropic talons that can tear through the Garu's flesh as though it were nothing. Its very presence unmakes reality, as those who dare to stand close to it instantly start to wither away. Most people react to Nexus crawlers with the same terror inflicted by delirium, if not a significantly worse sensation. It will take the bravest and most capable of the Garu and their spirit allies, who have the power to resist the reality-bending might of the Nexus crawler, to bring such a monster down. But the Garu have defeated greater banes than this. For some bonus threats, I will now talk about the various Fomori that do not have a corresponding bane, including a few Fomori that were created for my chronicles, and my discussions of them will be a little more drawn out. I will note that I present them as being capable of transforming in and out of a monstrous form, which isn't supported by a lot of werewolf materials, but I made this choice simply because I think it allows for more interesting antagonists. First up is an original one, the Chattermouths, which are actually a creation of my sister. The spirits at play here aren't quite of rage, but rather the pride of being hated and refusing to change. They love a position of benign authority, such as that of a middle manager or cop, and a position of influence is even better, as they make everyone beneath them miserable and resentful. While hunting, they inflict psychological torment with a dozen taunting mouths, and provoke individuals into attacking them. Before they know it, the Chattermouth has grown nearly 3 meters tall with gangly limbs, a swollen belly, and dozens of salivating human mouths all across its body. Victims charge at the Chattermouth, filled with the need to simply shut it up, only to be embraced and eaten alive. Sometimes the victim gets away, and the Chattermouth's words echo in their head long after the encounter. Eventually, the words start to be repeated by mouths that open up across the victim's body, and if their corruption is not addressed, they too will become a Chattermouth. Various scavenger spirits, often in the shape of rats or insects, seek out dying humans and possess them, gradually manifesting an infestation of their associated animal as teeming swarms feasting upon their host. These hollow men become stuffed with vermin and gain some of their associated traits, such as poisonous bites or the ability to crawl along walls. However, these possessions always have an expiration date as the host becomes fully devoured. Before then, the hollow man might try to hunt and kill others to find more sources of food or work with other servants of the Wyrm. If needed, they can unleash the swarm within to attack foes, even emptying their host completely to leave behind a mass of dead skin. From there, they perish, re-inhabit their host, or find a new dying human to infest. Found among the more powerful collectives of the Wyrm servants, Green Sirens are social saboteurs, well aware of the Wyrm's grand schemes, and furthers them by pretending to be against them. Whether the strategy is to pin the causes of climate change on the general public, rather than the monolithic corporations that refuse to change, or aid companies with simple greenwashing campaigns, the Green Sirens have the resources and connections to make it happen. Unless they're backed into a corner, they can prove to be pretty benign, even as social engagements with them can prove to be suspiciously exhausting. They might have a bit too much ambition though, even knowingly trying to sway Garu with a less clear view of the enemy to divert them from actual threats. However, their behavior is stable enough to make them reliable. Banes of starvation can try to feed their perpetual hunger off of more than just plain food, and harvest the pure spiritual energy of the Umbra, though it never puts them at rest. When possessing humans, often the most desperate and weak among the species, this ability becomes far more valuable to the servants of the Wyrm. Ravenous locusts may appear as frail, withered even, but they are capable of completely draining a cairn of its power for its own use, at least until its nature forces it to undergo a spiritual mitosis and bring them back into starvation. Until then, they can use tainted gift-like powers, and the damage their presence does to a cairn can set the Garou back significantly. The starved nature of a ravenous locust can make them slightly impulsive and unreliable. However, the power they present makes them invaluable in a calculated strike against the Garou, and the chance to satisfy their craving is enough to get them in line. I should note that those familiar with Mage's Ascension may recognize cairns as a type of quintessence node, and Fomori as a kind of ally some Nefandi might make use of. So yes, a ravenous locust could also be capable of severely damaging a mage chantry if not stopped. Some Fomori can go unnoticed for a long time, as they never really change after their possession. Violent yet discreet abusers make for the perfect hosts of tormenting banes, as they already have a consistent victim to slake their hunger with. Once these rotten individuals become capital S sadists, they strive to find new horizons of torment, indulging the physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual, so long as it brings suffering. Sadists might go out to hunt for victims other than the one they already have access to, but they can't hold down a job for very long, let alone a conversation that doesn't circle back to inflicting pain on others. Their most peculiar feature is that they do not truly transform as much as they simply flicker into their true form. It is covered by burgeoning muscles, completely lacks skin and cartilage, and stands at around 2 meters tall. Its head not only lacks eyes, but lips as well, which reveals an unnatural set of teeth in the shape of a smile, going from one ear to the other. The most unique feature on any individual sadist is their preferred instrument for violence, which is displayed in their true form as an exaggerated construct of flesh and bone attached to the body. Examples include enlarged fists, a belt fused to the hand, or a stinger attached to a grossly swollen tongue or set of genitalia. Those who have lived lives tormented and have lost all hope, living on for reasons which they often find themselves doubting, can be broken by banes of despair to become wretches. Their bodies become perpetually malnourished, and their faces show them marks of intense exhaustion and constant crying. When they shift into their true form, such as when they need to defend themselves, they become gaunt beasts with strange horns atop their head, and their chest cavity tears open to reveal a hole where their heart should be. As Fomori, they are capable of projecting their unnatural anguish, and their very presence drains the world around them of hope at every level. Anyone who isn't unnerved by this aura becomes gripped by dread and sorrow that rips through their every defense and persists long after their bizarre encounter. Wretches are repelled by hope as much as they repel it, so they plant their roots where no one will bother them. However, their entropic presence wears down the local gauntlet, which can allow banes to pass through. Though uncommon, and they are not pleasant company at all, this makes them invaluable in the operations of black spiral dancers and other servants of the Wyrm working on Earth. It takes a lot of particular circumstances for Fomori to congregate into communities, often requiring the mandate of a powerful bane or black spiral dancer, the influence of worm-worshipping cults, or even the concentrated corruption that might appear among black spiral dancer kinfolk. When this occurs, the Fomori have a chance of breeding for various reasons, ranging from deliberate agendas of having more monsters for future battles, to sexual assault being used to reinforce hierarchies. The result might be a human child that will get turned into a Fomori, or killed before adolescence, or some worm-spawned abomination if the spiritual and biological components at work in Fomori pregnancy go haywire. The resulting communities rarely persist beyond 2 or 3 generations before they are struck down or conscripted into a greater war effort against the Garou, which breaks the community. In the meantime, they enjoy lives of sadistic revelry and practice dark rituals that outline a social order, a universal one being a rite of induction for Fomori children that reach maturity. Fomori families typically exist in remote communities, but a few are found in suburban and urban environments where they exist as hidden dynasties, only indulging their natures behind closed doors. While one might easily think of the inbred cannibals from The Hills Have Eyes, no two Fomori families are wholly alike. Some might have more in common with the sophisticated Revenant families from Vampire the Masquerade, or dominated by a single patriarch or matriarch-like figure, more in line with real cults or cases of incest. The Fomori families are as vast and diverse as the Fomori themselves, and it's not difficult to weaponize their numbers against the Garou, who are rarely prepared to deal with such a threat. Between the Banes and Fomori, Werewolf really does make the most of its concepts for what I consider to be some of the best generic antagonists for a lower-stakes story in an apocalyptic setting. In every edition, storytellers are provided with the tools to make their own Fomori, with extensive lists of powers and types of Fomori. The Freak Legion book, released under the Black Dog label, even gives rules for playing as Fomori, though the most interesting depictions for my tastes are between 20th Anniversary and 5th edition. These antagonists also work quite well for Hunter and Mage, as they provide a sort of agnostic but very unique take on demonic possession, which is sorely lacking in the World of Darkness. Now, I've mentioned Servants of the Wyrm and Wyrm cults a number of times now, but there is one specific faction in service to the Wyrm that towers over them all. I believe it is time to address the multi-billion, possibly even multi-trillion dollar elephant in the room. Holding companies are corporate entities that own other companies in exchange for some kind of support, which can be legal, financial, or whatever else. Some companies, especially banking and investment firms, also operate as holding companies. Insurance companies can basically operate as holding companies with the companies they have insured. You might have heard of Allstate or MetLife because they stick their names on things like stadiums, or United Health because, I don't know. But the Wyrm doesn't need to stand at the top in order to wage war against Gaia. Pentex is the kind of thing that happens when you don't treat humans like cattle that you occasionally hunt for fun. A 19th century oil company got fucked up by Banes, may or may not have made a pact with the Spirit to Fly, and split into its financial powerhouse with Pentex and an energy behemoth known as Endron, which tenuously exists in 5th edition, but put a pin in that. Whatever happened 100 or more years ago is a done deal, and Pentex dedicated the rest of their existence to furthering the Wyrm's influence on Earth. Given that they got their start somewhere between 1865 and 1916, it's not like they needed much help with that. But the weapons they bring to bear allow them to resist the Garu's effort in turning the tide of the apocalypse. At the top of Pentex is its board of directors, a colorful ensemble of Wyrm cultists, including a vampire. They oversee the benign corporate operations of Pentex itself and its covert operations, including manipulation of its subsidiaries that also serve the Wyrm, and a few projects that are wholly unnatural in its goals. Beneath the board are various subdivision chiefs, which have a more hands-on role with the projects sanctioned by the board. From here, we find mages, black spiral dancers, the occasional Fomor, and generally unpleasant individuals, as one should expect. They are only vaguely united by their service to the Wyrm, and the diversity of perspectives on something as nebulous as the spiritual manifestation of cosmic entropy has resulted in many betrayals and usurpations within Pentex's leadership. To be honest, I am not heavily invested in the identities at the top of Pentex, and some of the things we are told about the board of directors mean nothing if you don't have a good grasp on game lines beyond Werewolf the Apocalypse. Also, no Werewolf the Apocalypse book presents the Ubisoft-style killing your way to the top strategy as a viable method for defeating Pentex, which makes the value of naming each head of the Hydra a little dubious for me. After all, killing your way to the top is a more apt description for trying to join Pentex's leadership, and I think it would be better for storytellers to come up with their own Pentex bosses depending on what fits in their chronicle. The broad descriptions here and the core rulebooks might be enough for inspiration, but if not, the Book of the Wyrm for whatever edition you prefer bar 5th edition has you covered. An aspect of Pentex exclusive to 5th edition is that its allegiance is not to the Wyrm, but it is still in service to a Bane with the power of an Incarna, which doesn't actually contradict much published material. This vial incarna is Fly, with Pentex bound to it by a literal contract locked deep within a secret vault. Fly wishes to treat the corpse of Gaia the way its spawn treat any corpse, as a breeding ground for vermin. If you want a more grounded picture for what that might look like, a lot of corporations are knowingly worsening climate change and are preparing for its consequences even as they lie to the masses, telling them there is nothing to worry about. They are apathetic towards the effects of climate change for various reasons, such as a confidence that people at the top have that their wealth can shelter them from the consequences, the belief that this world doesn't matter compared to the paradise that awaits, or, more honestly, they just want to pillage the world for all it's worth. As for Pentex, they believe all of these things without contradiction, in accordance with their contract to Fly. Though no guru could claim it with certainty, it seems that Pentex's deal has its own favor and ban, which might be take everything that you can and never let consequences catch up to you, respectively. These tenets are what drive all of Pentex's operations. Beyond the basic operations expected of any holding company, such as dispatching lawyers or PR firms to cover for its closest subsidiaries and moving around money, its covert operations can be split between security and research, which are just about always euphemistically labeled as special in documentation. Security operations include both information gathering and taking out threats of any shape and size. From the nosiest journalist to the most legendary guru, Pentex will dispose of them all by any means necessary. Chomping at the bit for the most dangerous assignments are the first teams, trusted specialists pulled from various private security companies Pentex owns, military connections, and its own security team. A 3-stage training program gradually exposes its subjects to various Bane-imbued medical supplements and seminars by Fomori with mind-bending powers. The training regimen for the first teams is what one might expect from a nation's elite special forces, while incorporating top-of-the-line hardware, including weapons that are as experimental as you need them to be for a chronicle. There is a precedent for Pentex using mech suits, and the Society of Saint Leopold using exosuits has been featured in 5th edition releases. By the time the trainees are fully corrupted, they receive their training for combat operations against lycanthropes. They can even boast an immunity to delirium. A fully trained first team will always primarily be made up of tainted humans, with a few Fomori assets, as their majority can keep their unstable but powerful allies in check. The humans are rarely interested in Pentex's agenda beyond the pay, maintaining their professional standard, and slight corruption, which is enough for them to fight to the death even against a guru. Due to the attrition rate first teams deal with, the commanders and instructors are made up of veterans who have proven themselves to survive the impossible. Veteran Fomori rarely retire to the backlines and will instead lead from the front. First teams are as dangerous as knowledgeable humans come, and know better than to get in a fair fight. Of course, they might be the ones to set off explosives in a perfectly undefended tactical asset, but they can also draw Guru into a kill box before unleashing a torrent of flame and silver. First teams have rough but accurate enough knowledge on most Guru factions and social roles, tribes and auspices respectively, while Guru are kept in the dark on what to expect from a first team beyond their physical capabilities. They might snatch kinfolk in the dead of night, assassinate whoever has most renown according to a scryer, infiltrate a Guru-backed operation to gather intelligence, and with their Fomori, things can get a lot more unpredictable. This isn't even to mention the occasional alternative forms of support they might receive from other supernaturals with no love for the Guru or their cause. With all of that said, first teams are top-shelf hard stuff, and if it's not a Guru sept working against them, Pentex would rather send one of their many corrupted private security forces to address the problem. First teams are also somewhat unstable and can't really be paraded around, so expect them to go after the Guru without any identifying marks. Their targets might know the attackers, but anyone else will see them as mercenaries taking contracts under the table. Even their employers can have some plausible deniability, or at least they should. Everything I've read presents first teams as official security assets with covert training, but since each first team is described as a walking PR nightmare, With the rage of a Garou and not even half of the self-control, I present them in Homebrew as an off-the-book security program that if ever compromised, only one person under Pentex or a subsidiary would take the fall for them. They would claim that they used various individuals as private security paid out of pocket, and used their power to mitigate any potential ramifications while keeping Pentex out of the spotlight. And then comes the second teams, which are probably really scary. Now, something as dangerous as the first team program is only possible thanks to the much longer history of Pentex's research operations. Just as the first teams pull from Pentex's private security holdings, research operations are conducted through Pentex's biomedical and biotechnology holdings. This can mean that scientists and subjects are pulled from those companies, but more importantly, means that Pentex has the research largely conducted in the facilities of their companies rather than their own. A few do exist for Pentex's fully dedicated use, but these are the business equivalent of black sites. Wherever R&D is conducted, some bullshit is guaranteed. Garou get experimented on, Banes are cultivated to produce the best Fomori possible, corrupted technology and medicine is tested for use by first teams. It's a lot more sophisticated than whatever is going on in the back rooms of a Wyrm cult or a Black Spiral dancer cairn, but it's functionally no less depraved. Two products of particular revulsion that have been spat out by Pentex's research operations are Fomarks and Mockery Breeds, which are the products of Project Iliad and Project Lycon respectively. For any fellow Resident Evil enthusiasts, Fomarks are to Fomori what Tyrants are to zombies. They are one-of-a-kind tailor-made Fomori that fulfills three specific criteria for Pentex's standards. They must be able to survive in the long term independently, physically match a Garou in crimeless form, and operate covertly. In practice, and by that I mean in Chronicles, they are just big boss fights, and their capabilities are only limited by the imagination of a storyteller. Even the 20th anniversary book of the Wyrm only gives us two rules for Fomarks, which is that they must have the ability to mutate into a bigger monster, and are equal in might to a Ferric toy, which is a kind of super bad Fomor that Pentex can't create but are also kind of boring, which is why I didn't mention them earlier. For something more consistently successful and just as dangerous, Pentex has been cooking up counterfeit Fera, also known as Mockery Breeds. First teams have been capturing Garou or any other shapeshifter that falls into their hands, and shipping them off to get experimented on for a while. But towards the turn of the millennium, Project Iliad's little brother, Project Lycon, finally bore fruit. The first successful Mockeries were the Werewolves, created from perfectly normal wolves that are implanted with genetic material from Garou, trained to seek out their flesh, and are also capable of shifting into a tortured Krynos form. The werewolves proved about as reliable as starving dogs could be when presented with the right food. Future efforts went more wild and weren't universally successful. The werefrogs of the Anurana went rogue on their first deployment to be monsters without a leash, and the werecockroaches of the Samsa all came out too insane to be reliable allies, though they've seen use for psyops by first teams. The more successful products of Project Lycon are the rampaging were-rhinoceroses of the Karasi and the ruthless were-apes of the Yeren. One of these were-apes, Sir Frederick Appleton, is actually a major shareholder for Pentex and maintains the hands-on agenda for the Mockery Breeds. They certainly aren't as dynamic as the proper Fera and even more volatile in their behavior, but they're generally on the same page as Pentex and just about as physically capable as the actual Fera. Though a lot of corporations can play host to the Wyrm's influence, even deliberately, Pentex has a massive conspiracy to support the Wyrm, which rips through its hierarchy from its own corporation to the many companies in Pentex's portfolio. They are technically subsidiaries, though a few companies are estranged from Pentex, thanks to shell corporations putting distance between them and a less valuable or more risky holding. The Garou consider the ones with Wyrm-throwing operations fronts, because spiritually, that's what they are. A vast majority of what the subsidiaries get up to is benign, even if it's shitty, which might still attract the Garou who aren't politically jaded. Workplace abuse and harassment, fraud, under-the-table deals with politicians. If you can think of some moral failing for a corporation beyond its existence, a Pentex subsidiary will probably be exceptionally guilty of it. In practice, that actually makes them difficult to suss out. However, some Guru are excellent detectives, and a few gifts can aid them in identifying the subsidiaries that are worth their time. They can stick their activist connections on the rest. Methods for combating subsidiaries vary as much as the subsidiaries themselves. Culling Banes and executing Fomori or Wyrm cultists embedded into those companies goes a long way if the Garou can keep it clean. Some Garou, such as those in the Glasswalker, Silverfang, and Shadowlord tribes, have the resources, connections, and skills to match a Pentex subsidiary on its own terms. If the target plays dirty, then the claws can come out. Unfortunately, having perspectives split between two worlds that occasionally intersect with each other, and being beasts of rage has gotten the Garou of the modern day to reap the consequences of their past failures. That's not to discredit Pentex's own cunning and capabilities given its vast resources, but they are cozy in the system that supports the exact kind of shit they get up to. Now, understanding how the Hydra that is Pentex works, and does conflict with the Garou, I'll dig into a few subsidiaries, but before I do so, I think there is something storytellers should keep in mind when picking what subsidiaries show up in their chronicle. A lot of classic subsidiaries are written as, "We will sell you shit that will make your life worse and you will like it," as customers are often unwittingly turned into servants of the Wyrm. More charitably, it can be read as, "Uncritical consumption under capitalism will spiritually fuck you up," which I kind of agree with. Apologies for potentially introducing this term to your head, but if you've ever heard of people talk about goy slop, that's kind of how classic subsidiaries and their products are presented, though I seriously doubt that it has any kind of hateful intention. Anyways, this presentation often ends up geared towards killing both customers and employees, which is a little questionable for my taste. 5th edition subsidiaries concern themselves with the moral failings that uphold the most rotten corporations, and that is where the Wyrm's influence seeps in. The kind of hate the player and not the game attitude is sort of silently acknowledged with the 5th edition Wyrm-type sourcebook, with the subsidiaries presented being the game in question. Fomori are almost exclusively made from the employees who put the most effort into upholding rotten institutions instead of uncritical customers. It's a little drier than what we got for previous editions, but I'm more aligned with the ideas behind it. Even then, sometimes you gotta hate the customer, and for that reason, I like featuring the classic subsidiaries as secondary to the ones presented in 5th edition, like the Rearguard and Vanguard of Pentex's mission. I know that some people really like the silly, if still morbid depictions, like what some of you might have seen in Hunter the Parenting, but the chronicles I've taken part in have all the horror and incidental comedy of Fear and Hunger, so part of me wants to impart my experience here, though I won't claim any style to be superior. Now, there are a ton of subsidiaries, so I will give you the 6 presented in Wyrmtide, plus one of the 3 companies not in Pentex's pocket, along with 5 classic subsidiaries. There are also 3 classic equivalents to new subsidiaries, which I will also talk about. A middle-of-the-road private security company based in the United States, Acheron hires whoever falls on the many wayward paths of the world's militaries. Trigger-happy riflemen, aspiring serial killers, and veterans who became slaves to their vices all have a place on their roster for jobs across the planet. Unfortunately, its less than glamorous reputation of scandals related to corruption and crimes committed by its mercenaries have pushed Acheron to work primarily for corporations instead of governments. Acheron's employees might be found protecting corporate operations in dangerous countries or regions struck by disasters where they are unsurprisingly quite ruthless and behave less than professionally. Under Pentex's direction, Acheron also runs a secret program to convert its worst soldiers into Fomori, which is only occasionally successful, and the most trusted mercenaries into specialists for unusual threats, such as the Garou. Though it's important to have assets such as Acheron for protecting Pentex's operations, it is not the only private military corporation in Pentex's holdings, and given the amount of controversies Acheron is accumulating, they might not stick around for the long haul. Until then, Acheron has made their moves in lobbying politicians to support corporations like their own, which can be a bigger threat to the Garou than any Fomori they happen to churn out. The less stable of Pentex's 2 major energy enterprises, Albion Petroleum is a UK-based fossil fuel company with zero analogues to any real British petroleum company, which has tapped into global oil harvesting operations and has recently stepped into the coal industry. Albion is disreputable, but it's well established in its industry, the result of their exceptional spending on PR, security, and bribery. This more or less cancels out the many potential controversies regarding its cost-cutting measures and the resulting incidents, such as workers getting maimed, or how every single oil facility leaks a good chunk of its harvest. Not helping their situation is the Garou, but they have made some adaptations to the threat they pose. A few private labs are host to its own special projects, where the company's most clued-in employees parley with Banes, and the special operations take care of anyone or anything that gets too close to the company's darker motivations, with methods that can be as direct as a kill squad, or as discreet as paying locals to attack any threats to Albion. Their oil rigs, thanks to their isolation and concentrated corruption, are host to captured Wyrm spawn horrors and cults. The rigs themselves can even animate to attack intruders and employees with wavering loyalties, with bursting pipes or machinery activating on its own. Albion's classic counterpart is the equally subtle Endron International, which perpetrates much of the same evil but is more secure in its position, catastrophic oil spill in 2010 notwithstanding. Another key difference is that Endron does a lot of illegal drilling, which is supported by the Endron Exploratory Personnel Squadrons. These teams are ensembles of scientists, engineers, mercenaries, and Fomori, which seek out locations that can't just be stripped of oil, but in such a manner that it destroys places of spiritual power, which quite notably includes a lot of cairns. With this practice, Endron actively looks for conflict a lot more than Albion. Endron is kept around in 5th edition with a mention in the Shattered Nation sourcebook, and it's not like Pentex would turn down having 2 non-renewable energy enterprises. An auxiliary force to Pentex's effort, but an undoubtedly important one, is Bailey, Reeves, and Mark, or as I'll abbreviate them, BRM, a consultancy company that supports other companies in cultivating and maintaining the best image possible. If Pentex wants a company they don't own but supports to get some good press coverage, they give BRM a call and they will see if that company is worth the time. BRM can also move to the press negative coverage, or even amplify it if a company is better off getting sacrificed. Politicians and social media influencers are also in BRM's portfolio, which keeps them more out-of-touch leaders clued into current discourses, while providing similar protection to what the corporate partners receive. With how benign yet important they are, this makes them an exceptionally annoying threat that the Garou are almost entirely unprepared to face. But there is some supernatural corruption. A few particularly skilled employees get referred to private medical practices for experimental procedures, which results in them getting turned into more insidious kinds of Fomori. A shapeshifter doppelganger monstrosity is the kind of threat that even the most cunning journalist isn't prepared to deal with. But the Garou are, and cooperation with more ordinary individuals might be what is needed to give them a chance against BRM. Founded by a dynasty of cutthroat werewolf hunters that may or may not have also been cannibals, Gallagher Foods is a behemoth in the American meat industry. Quite frankly, it is difficult to imagine an industry more explicitly brutal and callous than this one, so Pentex was quick to tap into it through Gallagher. The cruelty towards animals in their slaughterhouses is par for the course in the meat industry, and serves as a backdrop for Gallagher's sloppy business practices. The slaughterhouses are by and far of low quality in their construction and equipment. The consequences of this are frequent and occasionally fatal, but Gallagher likes hiring undocumented immigrants who would be hesitant to take action against their employers. Whoever dares to do so will face Gallagher's army of union busters who are willing to kill their opposition and have the sense to make it look like an accident. This security force makes up some of the Fomori in Gallagher's ranks, which are backed up by the kind of people who like working in slaughterhouses, which make for easy hosts, along with umbral horrors attracted to slaughterhouses, and the independent werewolf hunters the Gallagher family has on Dial. Shoot, there might even be a Skinner among Gallagher's contacts. Gallagher Foods' classic counterpart is more or less Otulli's, a fast food chain that serves Bane-infused food to its customers, and while the food is probably fine, everybody hates their life a little more when stepping into Otoli's. These consistently unpleasant and greasy establishments have the all-American menu of Sonic, the aesthetics of Denny's, and the reputation of Long John Silver's. Workers have their souls ground to dust, which makes them easy prey for Banes that turns them into pitiful Fomori, and the customers couldn't care less so long as their food is served quickly. I have taken part in a chronicle where an Otoli's is depicted, and we focused on its presence being a mark of a growing food desert, which is a much more systemic problem than unhealthy food that Pentax is happy to contribute to. All things considered, a lot of what White Wolf tried to get at in Werewolf books with Otoli's was kind of short-sighted. As a final side note, Otoli's has been depicted as owning the slaughterhouses that supply it, which is inaccurate to how the supply chain for fast food works, so the existence of Gallagher actually solves this little frustration I had. The freight business is one a lot of us hardly concern ourselves with, especially once you look past the businesses that get stuff to our front door like FedEx. This obscurity is what allowed Living Earth Logistics to have a greenwashed brand identity that hasn't been fully dismantled, and since they operate on the open seas with their ships staffed by very loyal crew members, they can despoil the Earth's oceans with little scrutiny. Even better, the Garou are not exactly aquatic. The ocean is full of ancient worm-spawned horrors, and operations like theirs have created plenty of powerful banes from centuries of pollution and probably even whaling. Every once in a while, a ship goes dark and is taken off of official records, left down the waters to continue contaminating the ocean. These steel leviathans become temples for the company's worm cults, who establish a demented altar deep within the heart of the ship and beckon the most fearsome banes to take over the vessel. Anything that dares to destroy it faces some of the toughest strongholds of the Wyrm servants, crawling with banes, Fomori, black spiral dancers, and other horrors along with the ship itself which resists invasion. Genuinely one of the coolest and one of my favorite things in the World of Darkness. The private medical industry has a pretty thick sense of humor in its ability to restore one's health, restrained by its hunger to ruin people's financial lives, which can worsen their health. And that's just a surface level problem. Every other sin one can imagine from the industry, from fraud and bribing, to rushed clinical trials and bioweapons research, are obscured by the pockets of this industry, and in the case of Schletta's Pharmaceuticals, some weirder agendas. In discrete laboratories, tainted concoctions are injected into animals and humans alike in hopes of creating new beasts that can circulate through Pentax's operations. It is one of many medical companies in Pentax's portfolio providing R&D for Project Lycon, and its ability to put out combat-effective Fomori is valuable. However, Schletta's labyrinthine structure, designed to keep its secrets safe, causes a lot of stress for the company at every level. Its classic equivalent is Magadon Pharmaceuticals, a once deeply incompetent medical company that got scooped up by Pentax and turned into a highly reputable enterprise. Its specialty for Pentax's operations, beyond everything I described for Schletta's, was that it sold Bane-tainted medicine to its customers in order to corrupt them, even if its stated functions were perfectly fine. This is probably the best example of the "we will sell you shit that will make your life worse and you will like it" style that old Pentax subsidiaries were written with, in ignorance of a lot of the actually shitty things the pharmaceutical industry does literally all the time. On the plus side, it did deepen the grimdark texture whereas the Apocalypse always sort of had, so I get where this approach is coming from. I prefer the Schletta's presentation, but I would keep the Magadon name just because there's more aura to it. Hell, given how Schletta's is structured, it could be Magadon at the top of its conspiracy, or Magadon is just one of the businesses Schletta's dragged into its own operations. Pewter Group is not actually a Pentax subsidiary because it simply does not need anyone's help to be one of the many reprehensible companies in one of the most demented industries in the world. Its private prisons are substandard in such a way that is par for the course for much of the United States, pandering to conservative ideals of punitive punishment through sadistic employees, unsafe forced labor, and zero consideration for prisoner rehabilitation. There is even talk of expanding their operations to micro-detention centers, a potential safety net in case the private prisons were ever to fall out of favor. This doctrine has gifted Pewter Group with a vast array of connections among the social elite, such as the politicians who hire Pewter for their prisons, or the businessmen who hire them for their labor force. Sometimes they gather in the basement of Pewter Group's largest complex in the deserts of Texas, where they take a few convicts they have declared dead to a kind of private death row, only for Pewter Group's highest paying allies to enjoy. By being one of the worst companies in the private prison industry, its operators have caught wind of enough outlandish rumors regarding their prisoners to spark an investigation, and their conclusion has ensured that Pewter Group will never change. A pseudoscientific worm cult has emerged from Pewter Group that has been experimenting on prisoners to alter their psychology, making them more amenable to submission or possession. They don't understand the spiritual components at work when a prisoner transforms into a monster, but its scientists have opened themselves to less than rational approaches so long as they get results. What they might never see are the banes that haunt the prison walls, or even the black spiral dancers who come into the prisons at night to take advantage of the hostile environments fostered by Pewter Group. I don't actually care that Pewter Group isn't a Pentech subsidiary, but if you asked me what my favorite subsidiary is, I would still say it's Pewter Group. Moving on to classic subsidiaries, there are few better companies that exemplify how I describe them than Avalon Incorporated. Comparable to Hasbro in its diversity of products, Avalon targets impressionable children with a G.I. Joe parody for boys that glorifies violence, and a Barbie parody for girls that stokes self-loathing, among several other products ranging from board games to collectibles. All of it is at least a little crass, gauche, and corrupted. Ideally, a loyal customer would fill their child's life with enough toys by Avalon that they would be susceptible to bane possession. That's why there's less than subtle agendas behind every product, pulling a child's mind in different directions until something speaks to their worst nature. Also, this company was founded by one Daniel Dial, who is explicitly revealed to be a former son of Ether with twisted ideals. He's not a Nephondus according to the revised book of the Wyrm, but I think you could depict him as such and it would make zero impact on his character on the count of him being uniquely fictional. A fool might think that conversion therapy's stated goal of the returning subjects to normalcy might put them in the Weaver's domain, but as an industry that focuses on the destruction of the self, it's actually quite an interesting investment for the servants of the Wyrm. Homogeneity Incorporated provides conversion therapy for willing queer adults through a 10-week program that stokes their target self-loathing until they get melted back into the cishet fold. In the long run, most come out of the program feeling hollow, and the banes haunting homogeneity are drawn to them for possession, like if I Saw the TV Glow had an ultra bleak ending where there isn't any more time and you get recruited into the Freak Legion. The resulting Fomori are pulled back into the company to represent it in its efforts to push for a more queer-phobic society that will create more self-loathing queer people who turn to homogeneity, which turn into Fomori, and the cycle continues. This Pentech subsidiary is only featured in the infamous Freak Legion book, and even comes with its own unique Fomori, the Normalities, which are honestly just attack dogs among Fomori. The concept is more interesting than its execution, which originally only focused on gay people, and I rolled my eyes a bit at the company name chosen by the writers. However, that only made me want to share it more. Perhaps you or someone else viewing this video can really bring out the horror of homogeneity that the old Freak Legion book tried to but didn't quite reach, at least for me. To up our spirits a little bit after something so horrifying, let's crack open that evil beer company that has become infamous in the World of Darkness community. Thanks, Alphabusa. Anyways, long ago, the King family saw a world that was not theirs, and they wanted to do something about it. They tapped into hard drinks, and it was a respectable venture, even if the King family didn't hesitate to tear itself apart over the slightest of perceived transgressions. By the time we get to the modern patriarch, Jeremy King, he puts the family business under Pentech's flag, and they've gone to work on more or less proving the old temperance movement right. Even for a Pentech subsidiary that is part of its apocalyptic agenda, it's a remarkably subtle operation on the supernatural front. Of course, they dump the byproducts of their industry into perfectly clean waterways, and their products are stronger than they let on, but it doesn't get as much scrutiny as other companies. King is a certified pisswater brand, and they have the operational scale of Anheuser-Busch. The fact that they don't have the same level of success is a massive problem for the arrogant King dynasty, which has driven them to create various idiosyncratic marketing practices that are largely failures or only appeals to their most die-hard fans. The worst part of King breweries, at least to the Guru, is the cocktail of liquid shit that King is when all of its own subsidiaries start working together. Not in the corporate way, but the whirlwind of wealth that allows King breweries to go on a rampage. They control a non-profit that clears it of suspicion regarding its deliberate efforts to pollute clean waters. Its importing services double as a smuggling operation for Pentex's fronts, moving hazardous materials and tainted relics alike. The mental effects of alcohol makes any good liquor a good carrier for a bane, and though not every drink is equally corrupted, it all serves the same purpose. The numbing haze that is willingly indulged by alcoholics practically marches them into the maw of the Wyrm, and so long as they keep paying, King is happy to scoot them along. If they come back out to the Fomori, then that's not their problem. The Red Network is just Fox News. I'm not even kidding. The Red Network is a far-right news and entertainment business that exists solely to make the lives of everyone worse. It deliberately agitates people and calls for them to turn their anger on people who don't deserve it, because hope for a world without conflict cannot turn a profit, and doesn't appease their worldview built on bloodthirst. The kind of shit the Red Network does kind of goes without saying if you know companies like Fox or the Daily Wire. Hell, maybe it would be good to pull influence from the modern Daily Wire when depicting them if you're looking for comedic relief. The 20th anniversary book of the Wyrm gave them a televised fight club thing using prisoners, and it's kind of funny to me that they imagined that before something as pathetic as Lady Ballers. Anyways, on page 156 of the Cameralist Sourcebook for 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, there is a mention of a red buzz, which is presented as a kind of online gossip rag. That's a mention of a 20th anniversary Pentex subsidiary in the 5th edition VTM book, which is a little nuts to me. A long-standing video game company that got its start in the 80s, Telus Enterprises, which doesn't feel like the right name, is one of Pentex's few forays into tech. This industry has always been the Weaver's deal, and it still is, but video games as a form of tech-based entertainment can coast pretty well by just being stimulating experiences rather than profound ones, which caught Pentex's interest. I completely understand and agree with the stance that video games are art, but it's often easy to not engage with them as such and still be entertained. So long as the game itself is decent, Telus can get away with a lot, such as making an immensely crass first-person shooter, a role-playing game that uncritically presents rampant industrialism, or a simulation game that doubles as a petri dish for human suffering. That's how Telus established its 3 core games of Biological Warfare, Eden Online, and The Clones. They're all time sinks, especially EVE Online, I mean Eden Online, and whether or not anyone's getting something good out of playing these games is at best dubious, but that won't stop them from coming back time and time again, even neglecting themselves to do so. Yes, this is, in fact, the video games will rot your brain Pentex subsidiary that is putting banes in your computer. This is on top of the company itself having that kind of deeply unserious workplace environment that will also crunch its staff relentlessly, to the point that sleeping at the studios is expected of employees. Honestly, Telus really is so benign that you could swap them out for Blizzard Entertainment, and it wouldn't change much in the chronicle they appear in. I don't know if that makes them really lame or secretly genius. To top this section off, I can't finish a discussion of subsidiaries without mentioning Black Dog Games Factory, which was White Wolf's self-parody insert. Its entire history is also a parody of White Wolf's, with the World of Shadow acting as the in-universe equivalent of the World of Darkness. The 20th anniversary book for the Wyrm even covers the company's buyout under Crowd Control Productions, renamed as Politically Corrupt Productions. Most pitifully is the mention of World of Shadow Online, from back when the World of Darkness MMORPG was still under development. Anyways, they get up to some bullshit like attacking other TTRPG developers and fucking goats, which isn't nearly as interesting as it sounds, at least to me. It's just the White Wolf guys having fun, even at their own expense with parodies of their own writers, parodies of the games they make, and parodies of the people who play them. There is even a unique type of Fomori mentioned in the Subsidiaries book, which are created from players of Black Dog Games called goblins, and they're just the kind of cartoonishly unpleasant individual associated with TTRPGs but are also monsters. So that's what I've got to say about Pentex and the threats they bring to a chronicle or as varied as companies themselves. I also think that there is plenty of room for storytellers to make their own subsidiaries, such as how it was until very recently that we got a company that focuses on the infamous meat industry. I also think there's a lot storytellers can do with homogeneity and the red network that wasn't done by White Wolf, and there are some subsidiaries that I haven't mentioned here, such as Siren Cosmetics and Slaughterhouse Video, because they aren't as fleshed out as the others. I will leave those to storytellers should they want to go through the books themselves. And on one final note, it's not always Pentex. Speaking only for myself, I think if you're running a Werewolf Chronicle or are playing in one, the antagonist should interact with the elements unique to its world. Pentex has that covered, either because of its worship of the Wyrm, or its pact with Fly, but you can still drop the Pentex conspiracy when doing institutional antagonists for all sorts of reasons that are listed on screen. Now, for something that really balances the crucial elements of Werewolf the Apocalypse, let me finish the central discussion with the evil-ass werewolves. We will never really know what the old White Howlers saw in the Black Spiral Labyrinth that convinced them to fall. We know that they were on hard times towards the end, and since the Imperium was in more recent memory in those times, seeing the rise of human empires did not help, especially when the Roman Empire went in hard on the White Howlers and the Pictish homeland they swore to defend. Their efforts to push back the Romans were met with failure. That alone was proof that the Garou were always going to be in humanity's shadow, and the War of Rage certainly put them in the shadow of the Umbra's residence. The Garou don't belong anywhere but with each other, and it was inevitable that some of them would be pushed to the darkest depths the universe had to offer, and if one would fall, others would follow. Ages have passed since the White Howlers emerged as the Black Spiral Dancers, their old proud patron of Lion having been sacrificed for something back in the labyrinths. Now, the list of reasons for siding with the Wyrm are beyond count, and new reasons get added every day. But, across editions, the reasons haven't always been the same. The classic Black Spiral Dancers, which rely significantly on the Krynosborn, are typically raised in dens, where they are taught the ways of their tribe, and learn to loathe the Gaian tribes, adopting the grudge of their ancestors towards the tribes that abandoned the White Howlers. The rest of the tribe are by a vast majority Hamid, for reasons I disagree with but I will get to. These come from kinfolk which have often been characterized as some variant of the term low-life degenerate, but they have also been described as more or less normal, with the tribe preferring a hands-off approach. When they do appear, the humans receive them in surreal interactions, entranced or terrified by the power of the dancer. That makes for the two polar opposite approaches for how their kinfolk are handled. In 5th edition, the Black Spiral Dancers are almost entirely a tribe of converts from the Gaian tribes, with a few being roped in not long after their first change before any tribe claims them, though converts also contributed to much of the tribe in previous editions. It is stated in all editions that the Black Spiral Dancers are all but certain to be the largest tribe, a writhing, resentful monolith as a testament to the Garu's failure, more grotesque and loathsome than even Pentex. One more edition difference is the nature of becoming and being a Black Spiral Dancer. Like with all tribes, there is a rite of passage, and some Garou exist as traitors who have not gone through the rite. Such warriors are not beyond saving. The tribe's rite of passage calls for the pup to enter the Black Spiral Labyrinth, either through a spiritual simulacrum, or literally enter the Umbra location, which culminates in a confrontation with the Wyrm. In the classic iterations, this results in a persistent insanity that plagues the entire tribe. Universal mental illness is, in fact, one of their defining traits. In 5th edition, the Black Spiral Dancers aren't typically insane, even after going through the labyrinths, but they are certainly demented and ideologically incompatible with the Gaian tribes, which means they are at least a little vulnerable to any rhetoric or mind games the Garou might want to play. Converting them is even explicitly possible in 5th edition, though that's more of an ethical problem than a matter of possibility. But whether one is trying to convert them or kill them, it's worth understanding the reasons why a warrior of Gaia would choose to become a Black Spiral Dancer. And I think the big ones can be broken down to dejection and temptation. Do they turn against the nation, or are they drawn to the spiral? The Bone Gnawers are meant to be humble with their place in the shadow of greater structures because they know how to thrive there. But that means if they start to genuinely struggle, they are expected to take it. Bone Gnawers are supposed to help each other, and can be glad to do so, but they can't always be there. And the same can be said for the other charitable tribes. Worse yet, they might find themselves in the company of uncaring pack and septmates, which drives them to seek company elsewhere, and at this point, the Black Spiral Dancers would be happy to take them in. The Children of Gaia have a rather unpopular position among the tribes, with their attitudes towards humanity which come under question with each new disaster. Their voices are easily drowned out under warmongering howls, and if resentment is allowed to build, it will turn them against the Gaian tribes. Both the Fianna and Heart Wardens place a lot of value on something that hypothetically should be held to a high regard in Garou culture, whether it's stories or territories. Garou frequently lose themselves when they fail to learn from the mistakes of their past or enter petty conflicts between septs, distracting them from greater issues. They might try to lose themselves in the indulgences their tribe is known for, but they do so alone, and that's when a Black Spiral Dancer might introduce themselves. The Geta Fenris might pride themselves for their devoted rage, but that makes them liable to burn out quicker in the face of repeated losses, and this is even worse for the Cult of Fenris. Repeated losses are also an easy way to lose faith with the rest of the tribe, which are liable to throw out anyone who is falling behind. If they come back as a Black Spiral Dancer, that is supposedly an individual failing, but more often, the dancers orchestrate the downfall of a Garou in the Geta Fenris to turn them against their fellow warriors, and it's not hard for their betrayal to get violent. Afterwards, they'll see if recruitment is possible. The Silver Fang similarly holds their Garou to extremely high standards, though on a different battlefield that is arguably more punishing. Such Garou might be taught of past leaders who they will never live up to, and when their attempts at leadership are resisted by pack or sept mates, it makes them question why the Silver Fangs did so much to feed their egos. Even worse is when they actually take charge of something, only for it to end in catastrophe. Underneath the relentless scrutiny of their fellow Garou, Silver Fangs might give into their rage and direct it towards other Garou in a downfall similar to what I described for the Geta Fenris. Both the Wendigo and Galestalker tribes are very respected but deeply isolated, almost entirely by choice due to past actions by other tribes or their own culture. They keep the other tribes at arm's length and they'll respect that, but that's also why they won't be surprised if they receive no aid when corruption seeps into their lives. It gets worse with the Wendigo tribe specifically, as a failure to maintain purity can be seen as a moral failing, and a fallen Wendigo might see their situation as a matter of fate, or they just turned against the Garou who let them fall. Considering the fall of the White Howlers, the Black Spiral Dancers can be awfully sympathetic towards these fallen Garou. Garou who have been released from their tribe, the Ronin or Forsworn, are at times perceived as future Black Spiral Dancers, but a lot of the circumstances I described for a Garou to fall to the tribe of traitors can just drive them into Hirana, which can be grounds for them to part ways. It is unfortunately true that the Black Spiral Dancers have a better time recruiting tribeless Garou, as the process is less challenging and can prey upon the reasons for their release. On the bright side though, many tribeless Garou are also remarkably stubborn, and the Black Spiral Dancers being a tribe at all might be a deal breaker for them. The Black Furies can find themselves at odds with the other tribes or even their own, as their revolutionary perspectives clash with traditionalist cultures, which are pervasive among the Garou. By comparison, the Black Spiral Dancers can appear shockingly egalitarian, and even if it's another might makes right shit show, their end goal will flatten out a lot of the structures the Black Furies are upset with. It is perhaps liberating to no longer concern themselves with building anything in place of what they hope to destroy. The Glasswalkers operate on a plane of reality more alien than the Umbra, at least to many Garou. In spite of this, they manage to thrive, but the tools they use in the upper echelons of society are perhaps more questionable than the offerings of the Umbra, perhaps even more powerful. Under-the-table deals are frequent, and so the Glasswalkers will try to scrutinize who they work with. It can be tempting to not look a gift horse in the mouth. Black Spiral Dancers are not firm allies of Pentex, and certainly not the myriad of other companies that are undoubtedly shitty, but disposable, so they can line them up like cans for an oh-so-cunning Glasswalker to knock down. The deals draw them in deeper, the returns become greater, and in the end, being a Black Spiral Dancer from the comfort of a penthouse really isn't so bad. Hell, it's a position better than most dancers can hope for. The Red Talons do not necessarily love Gaia, they just hate humanity, and the same can be said about many Black Spiral Dancers, even if their reasons are vastly different. The other tribes also do a lot to restrain the rage of the Red Talons, and perhaps most importantly, even nature isn't kind to wolves, like, at all. They get plagued, starve, or killed by larger animals. The Impergia might have put humans under the Garou in the food chain, but humans were always above wolves in that hierarchy. Now there is no one above humanity, and they have violated the world with such recklessness that it threatens everyone on it. If they can't change course, then maybe the Red Talons should just help out humanity in their steady decline as a final spit in the face towards humanity, nature, and the Garou. Incidentally, the Black Spiral Dancers are way ahead of such resentful Red Talons. Also, that thing I said about nature is why I think there should be way more wolf-born Black Spiral Dancers. The Shadow Lords are in a similar position to the Glasswalkers, but it's undoubtedly more acclimated for corruption, and the methods they use are perhaps the most callous out of all the other tribes. Because of this, they are rarely trusted as a faction, with some tribes harboring even more distrust for them than what they reserve for the Glasswalkers. The Shadow Lords generally don't even like the other tribes, because they drag their weight behind the Silver Fangs or other failed leaders of the Garou Nation into an apocalypse they know they could have averted. Dejection may also contribute as failure pushes them away from their tribe mates, and Shadow Lords might legitimately fall out of pure spite for every Garou who refused to follow them or understand them. Also, if there is a single tribe most willing to actively negotiate with Black Spiral Dancers, it's the Shadow Lords. The Silent Striders have a lot of perspective, but more complicated burdens than most tribes. Most of all is their curse that banished them from their homeland and bound them to a nomadic existence. After millennia, most Silent Striders understand that their tribe is cursed. However, the specifics have become an enigma. Perhaps breaking their hex will mark a great change in the battle for Gaia, or at least that's the nice thing to whisper into a Silent Strider's ear before offering something innocuous. It could be the location of a wise spirit, the instructions for a rite, or even a fetish, but they'll make use of it for the sake of their tribe. Unfortunately, this can set a Silent Strider on the path to become a Black Spiral Dancer as the costs of breaking their curse begin to mount up, and inevitably call for some truly unforgivable transgressions. The stargazers do not fall easily, as their idiosyncratic perspectives are alien even to the most deranged Black Spiral dancers. The traitors, in turn, have little interest in bringing them into their fold, which is why it's always a delightful surprise whenever a stargazer turns up at their doorstep, with insights into the Wyrm that are kind of profound. It might seem that stargazers only value internal, immaterial things, but they really do have a lot to lose and very few allies. In hard times, it's not out of the question to understand their suffering so it can be meditated on, and aspects of the Wyrm can bring an honest form of liberation from that pain. This can push a stargazer's internal defenses to their absolute limits, and once they return to tranquility, they might see that descending the Black Spiral will bring more peace than anything Gaia has to offer. Both the Uktena and Ghost Council tribes have the isolation of the Wendigo or Galestalker tribes, but not even half of the same respect they receive, with active distrust defining much of their reputation. That doesn't mean they will fall easily, as the tribe knows the risks of delving into the unknown, but this means that the Garou of the tribe who do fall have done so with absolute willingness. Their desire to understand relieves one cautionary measure at a time, until the darkness of the Wyrm's embrace is more comforting than the impotent rage of the Garou nation. After a Garou is alienated from their tribe, tempted by the Wyrm, or experiences their first change under the Black Spiral Dancers, they rally under, well, something. For the classic iteration, they often want some kind of revenge for the fate of the White Howlers, or the circumstances that led individual dancers to betray Gaia. As for the tribe's central doctrine, they believe that the struggle against the Wyrm is futile. Gaia is dead, and her tribes only continue to fight out of stubborn arrogance, so slaughtering the defiant Garou is a mercy for them. This belief does relieve the Black Spiral Dancers from a lot of responsibility, and makes their position one of profound cowardice, but to them, those refusing to admit that Gaia is dead. After years of the Black Spiral Dancers claiming victory, their ideology has ended up a little lost at sea. A new idea has sprung up which has become even more tempting to the Garou, that, if Gaia is allowed to rot, it would allow for a new world to emerge, perhaps even with the Garou back at the top of the food chain. Those loyal to Gaia are preventing this rebirth from taking place and must be disposed of. This is the approach of 5th edition, and they have also left behind the Vengeance for the White Howlers thing, probably because as the years go by, the Black Spiral Dancers have increasingly fewer reasons to care about the tribe they were nearly 2,000 years ago. No one wants to be the Israel of Garou tribes. This has also left the Black Spiral Dancers to fracture quite significantly in ambitions. Their numbers are still overwhelming, but quite a few have essentially hung up their hats to haunt whatever corner of the world they can settle in, twiddling their thumbs or playing with themselves until the fated apocalypse finally comes to pass. Others have essentially gone into overdrive, entering violent crusades and rallying around their strongest in hopes of ending their eternal war against Gaia's defenders once and for all. As a tribe, the Black Spiral Dancers naturally have some support from the Umbra. The classic totem was Whippoorwill, a North American bird whose call has been associated with inevitable deaths. It gifted the dancers with the uncanny ability to imitate its call and enhance senses while in the dark, but forbids them from attacking birds and commands the Black Spiral Dancers to attend a moot at least twice a year. In 5th edition, their tribe patron is Bat, with its commandments being to dismantle all that is whole and never leave pure what could be soiled. This patron has been tied to the Black Spiral Dancers in the classic editions as a spirit that fell to the Wyrm when the Garou exterminated the bad shifters of the Camazots. It gifts loyal dancers with the gliding wings and ears of a bat, while amplifying their skills of intimidation, stealth, and survival, but mandates that the servants sleep upside down and never harm a bat. These are only 2 of the 8 patron spirits that support the Black Spiral Dancers, rubbing shoulders with the unknowable Kirijama, the hidden foe, to the crushing Green Dragon. These still exist in 5th edition, but without much information and are more clearly laid out in the 20th Anniversary Book of the Wyrm. With the core of their ideology now exposed, let's turn our attention to how that gets applied out in the world with the sub-factions of the Black Spiral Dancers. And, just a little heads up, we're definitely going to start running out of visual references. The Black Spiral Dancers have always had a tenuous relationship with Pentex, as they do not share the same esotericism as the Dancers, and they regularly treat each other's assets as disposable, but Pentex has always provided a very comfortable seat of power. Those who have aligned themselves with Pentex for the long haul are known as consultants, and they are met with significant scrutiny by the rest of their tribe, as their loyalties have shifted significantly. These consultants make themselves useful as liaisons between Pentex and Banes of Interest, fight alongside first teams, or operate as independent agents with absolute confidence from Pentex. Regardless of their station, they are still beasts of rage, and will look for any job in which violence is a guarantee. An esoteric order of assassins, the Death Talons are an irritating enigma to those for and even against Gaia. Their operations hinge on prophetic visions, and their leaders make one-way pilgrimages into the Umbra. The method behind the madness for their rites is difficult to understand without the tortured wisdom of a Theurge, though their rate of success shows that it's definitely there. In spite of their perplexing brand of brutality, they are remarkably collectivist for Garou, as each member must annihilate their sense of self to serve the Wyrm with the whole of their being. These quirks are not unheard of among those loyal to Gaia, such as the Ghost Council, Silent Striders, or Stargazers, so some Garou make the understandable mistake of not scrutinizing them for their behavior, which makes the Death Talons excellent infiltrators. They can be as pleasant as needed and restrain themselves from unnecessary conflict until they get the green light from a Theurge or Bane, and then all hell breaks loose. Humility is not plentiful among the Garou, let alone the Black Spiral Dancers, but they must admit that humanity has done more for the Wyrm than they could have possibly hoped for, and the Poison Spawn would like to express their gratitude. They are a proper high control group among their tribe's factions, with overbearing, hypocritical, and uncomfortably invasive leadership that enforces everything from who can be in a relationship to what clothes its members are allowed to wear. It is quite easy to get into, as they are very enthusiastic recruiters, but it also turns away a lot of its own members. But where charisma falters, ruthlessness takes its place, and the rumors of what happens to defectors have traveled far beyond the Poison Spawn themselves. This creates fiercely loyal followers who are willing to restrain themselves and mingle with humans to gather resources for the Poison Spawn, but also doesn't generate many allies among fellow dancers. A legend among the Black Spiral Dancers are the Ancients, a category of Bane formed by entropic events related to the Earth's formation and were buried by the passage of time. Some were subsumed into the essence of Gaia, and others were forced into the deep Umbra, but a few cling to the material world in subterranean spaces. By following up on the rumors, the Seekers of the Ancients have managed to uncover a few of these old Banes, and though they have found them to be single-minded and lethargic, they are nevertheless valuable assets. Their alien wisdom gives the Black Spiral Dancers profound insights and boons for their war, while the Ancients themselves act as the resident spirits for the most powerful hives. The Seekers know that their discoveries are not enough to make a difference, and continue their hunt, some hoping to enslave the Ancients, while others desired absolute surrender to the Wyrm's oldest children. If any of this reminds you of Werewolf the Forsaken, that's probably because these guys are from 20th Anniversary Edition. To cap this off with some proper maniacs, the Strontium Howl have taken a strong liking for the modern symbols of the apocalypse, such as heavy machinery, diesel, smog, and radiation. On their weaponized vehicles, they scour the earth in search of the weak and descend upon them like locusts. They take all that they can and leave what's left covered in the stench of scorched fuel and rotting flesh. In their own hives, they keep massive engines powered with whatever fuel and human viscera they can scrounge up, just so its fumes can taint the air. Strontium is a holy substance to the dancers of the Strontium Howl, specifically Strontium-89, a radioactive isotope that is taken by the body as calcium, unaware of the radiation that is allowed into the bones. The gifts of the Garu condition allows them to have these radioactive bones without most of the side effects, and this radioactive presence draws the fascination of Banes along with the respect of other dancers. Their methods might be gauche even for other Black Spiral dancers, but a car with silver wire wrapped around its bumper is the great equalizer between machine and Garu. This isn't even to mention their infamous initiation rite of putting the recruit in an arena with a big-ass vehicle, preferably a tank, and seeing if they survive. I'm a fan of these freaks, if you couldn't tell. From the movements to the home bases, here are some dwellings of the Black Spiral dancers across the globe that I believe are worth a mention. Formerly the territory of the local Balam, aka Were-Jaguars, the Hell's Hand Hive is the Black Spiral dancers' forward operating base for the war in the Amazon. It's a rather dismal place as the dancers settle underground where the pitch-black tunnels are prone to flooding, and drowning has claimed quite a few good warriors, but they did their best to make themselves at home. In a place as lush as the Amazon rainforest, its lifeless surroundings makes the place stand out, which also caught the attention of the Garu nation. Though having this place compromised was certainly unwelcome, the attempts by the Black Spiral dancers to corrupt the place paid off, and the physical side of the Hell's Hand Hive was whisked away by Banes into the Umbra. Its current location is uncertain to all but its inhabitants, but those of Gaia's tribes continue to search for it as such a drastic measure would likely be reserved only for a very drastic plan by the dancers. Deep in the Louisiana Bayou is a haunted manor that is the subject of local folklore, where it is called La Bête Noire, or the Black Beast, which is probably confusing for anybody familiar with the pseudo-Sasquatch legend of Louisiana of the same name. Anyways, this rickety old manor caught the attention of the Black Spiral dancers, who sensed a deeply evil presence from the place that even the mortals couldn't help but feel, hence the folklore. The true story is only remembered by its new inhabitants, which are a kinfolk family, and any dancers who have the fortune of staying. The story goes that a man in grief over the loss of his wife and child under mysterious circumstances reached out to mystics, who warned him of a great evil in the area that he was redeveloping. After his final attempt to continue his work, he returned to a business partner, adamant that he was giving up on his project. However, his figure was subtly changed by whatever he encountered into a damp, almost spongy form, and he was never seen again. This tale gave way to a dozen others, stoking the flames of whatever the former owner encountered and feeding the ancient evil underneath his manor, until the seekers of the ancients came along. They would uncover the truth of the manor and the bane that slumbered underneath it, known as the Mother Bog. While the kinfolk more or less live peacefully in the manor, some spaces of it, including the whole attic, are used for ritual purposes by the Black Spiral dancers, who wish to understand Mother Bog's madness. With patience, they might even awaken her, so that she can submerge all that she can in her filthy waters. Looming over a dismal British city is the Mayflower, and the surrounding housing complex, which was constructed after the Second World War as part of a public housing project that was neglected by the people in power. Under Thatcher's regime, it was pulled apart by predatory landlords looking for tenants with no one else to turn to and in no position to negotiate for their accommodations. But no one could really account for the true nature of those landlords. For nearly 50 years, a Black Spiral dancer pack known as Lamprey's Mates have exploited the Mayflower's tenants for financial and ritual resources, as the kind of people who have to take shelter here are rarely ones who will be missed by society at large. Their leader, the Philodox known as Gorger, is built like a brick shithouse even in his helmet form, commands 7 other dancers, and is unfortunately one of the many deeply off-putting slumlords the tenants have to deal with. The Mayflower itself is a derelict residential structure with surprisingly modern architecture that appears even more pitiful compared to the uninviting housing complex around it. Most of the time, it's a place for transients, but the hive run by Lamprey's Mates is hidden underneath the Mayflower through a series of tunnels. The only impressions their work in Lamprey's hovel leaves behind can't be noticed by the naked eye, but banes fester in the walls of the apartments, while some nights residents hear dull screams that come from below. They reasonably and somewhat correctly assume that their landlords are unscrupulous, perhaps even tied with organized crime, but what might happen if they speak out with no protection is worse than they can imagine, and they know it. Thunderworms are a kind of creature that aren't quite banes, though they are undoubtedly worm spawn, and are born from great catastrophes of the worm's nature. So a hurricane wouldn't create one, but a nuclear bomb would, and that's how we got the first Thunderworm, lovingly named Grandma by the black spiral dancers who managed to take residence in its belly. Here is where they established the Trinity Hive, and Grandma frequently slumbers underneath the White Sands Proving Grounds, where the first nuclear detonation took place. While that makes the hive quite young, it's pretty powerful and a lot more spacious than one might think. The dancers will occasionally rally on the surface, but the belly of the beast is the true hive, which has to be accessed by going down its esophagus, which is host to many lesser banes. Grandma's body can also contract to smash any unwelcome elements inside of it, which is a much appreciated security feature. But the best part about the hive is that it's mobile. No one inside intends on going too far from the test site, as that place has a lot of cultural significance. But we all know that the Trinity Hive will have one hell of an appearance for the final battle between the servants of the Wyrm and the warriors of Gaia. Deep in New Hampshire, there is a lakeside manor that is deeply off-putting to mortal eyes, and its origins are shrouded in mystery. The locals call it the House on the Hill, and this name has been adopted by its inhabitants. The dancer pack that currently occupies the house are not the original masters of the mansion, nor can they claim proper dominion over the hive, as the resident bane submits to no one. In the ruined ballroom of the manor, the dancers parley with the mountain worm, a truly ancient bane waiting for the apocalypse. It is a patient teacher to the wicked and enlightened, demanding only sacrifice and reverence from the dancers, which are led by the once usurped Philodox, only known as the King. He calls for grand moods in the manor, where strategizing, socializing, and ritual combat are performed before his fellow dancers, and the inescapable gaze of the mountain worm. The King's cruelty is only matched by his wisdom, and he knows that bringing about the apocalypse is not the sole obligation of his tribe, so he permits any fiend or monster who seeks the guidance of the mountain worm or his pack to visit. Traveling banes, vampires, and sorcerers are welcomed with open arms by the King and the mountain worm, and if a warrior of Gaia seeks to understand the tribe of traitors, or even seek to join them, then there is no better place to visit than the House on the Hill. I saved this one for last because it's my personal favorite hive, and has a good place in any crossover chronicle. And lastly, let's go through the final concentration of the Black Spiral Dancers, which I got the goddamn ad block plus, pop-up thing. God damn it. And lastly, let's go through the final concentration of the Black Spiral Dancers with the individual Garou who fight to bring about the apocalypse. It's about time I finally speak of Zythak, the most dangerous Garou alive. Probably, but almost certainly. This legendary Alrune has gotten up to so much shit that even her own tribe is happy to dip into apocryphal accounts, half believing the rumors and more so hoping that her fearsome reputation grips the warriors of Gaia even tighter. The legend of her birth is torn between the story of her being born in the belly of Grandma or her tearing herself out of her mother's womb. Funnily enough, both of these stories seem to be true, and things have only gotten more insane from there. Zythak deliberately hunts for the most legendary and venerable assets of Gaia's army. A Garou with enough renown or a Cairn that has been around long enough are added to her hit list, and for those strikes, she takes a somewhat expendable pack to fight alongside her and keep things unpredictable. Her brand of irreverent, merciless, no bullshit violence is by no means exceptional among the Black Spiral Dancers, especially their Aruns, but she is more than capable of backing up her reputation in battle. Very rarely will she ever go into Krynos form, as the gifts she's acquired or beaten out of Banes are beyond what most Garou will be able to get a hold of. Her whip, either the fetish, which I genuinely cannot pronounce, or the talisman known as the Bone Scourge, which depends on your edition, can flay the flesh from Garou in Krynos form and spirits alike, while her fists are more than enough to tear apart most foes. She has even received the favor of multiple patron spirits of the Wyrm, most notably the Green Dragon of Might and Calamity. This reputation is generally believed to be part of a dark destiny that few are able to completely confirm, but seems more likely with each hero of the Garou broken by her wrath. Her very birth is seen as the moment that marked the beginning of the apocalypse itself. From brutal violence to something more esoteric, Hiram Thane, better known as the Eater of Names, was a former Shadow Lord Theurge whose intellect found no use under his sept, but found its place among the Black Spiral Dancers. He applied his intellect to a theory of destroying concepts so thoroughly that whatever comes after Gaia's death would have to be completely different from what we see now. It's the kind of alien idea only a Theurge would pursue, but the nature of the Umbra makes these things possible, and this mission to destroy ideas is where the Eater of Names title comes from. Now, getting ripped apart in battle should have put an end to this mission, but the Garou who killed him probably should have tried harder, because the spiritual remnants that would typically create an ancestor spirit were scooped up by a powerful Bane of Chaos who could handle his essence with surprising stability. As a Theurge, he spent his life attaining the favor of several Banes, so they got to work on his theories of life, death, and existence to bring him back. After many failed attempts, they finally found an unfortunate Bonar to haunt and plant with fragments of the Eater of Names' essence through dreams until he was finally primed for rebirth, as the Eater of Names tore himself out of the Gaillard to wreak havoc once again. That's not the end of his story, but as the main antagonist for the Book of Hungry Names text-based adventure game, I'll leave the rest of his story for you to uncover. I'm already worried that I might have said too much here, but this is also a hell of a background for throwing him into your chronicles. As I've mentioned a few times, the dancer's relationship with Pentex is strained but certainly present, and Pentex won't turn down a dancer who's willing to play nice with them but dirty with their enemies. I can't say that the former Glasswalker, Mike Dragon's Wrath, played nice with the previous Chief of Security, but his manipulations and violence won him a seat on the Pentex Board of Directors as the Subdivision Director for Pentex's security operations. It's not like the methods he used were unheard of for gaining a seat, so no one is willing to question it too much. It can be a pretty banal position for a Black Spiral Dancer to take up. However, having a hand on the puppet strings of several corporations that are executing agendas in service of the Wyrm, while also commanding strikes against the Garou and their allies, makes Dragon's Wrath's position enviable for any dancer who's willing to exercise patience. That kind of patience makes Dragon's Wrath very welcome in the Pentex Board of Directors, and he even has the favor of a few fellow directors. But his plan doesn't end with him getting a seat on the board. When he became the security director, he also managed to get one of his packmates a position as his deputy director. One of the other directors is a Black Spiral Dancer, but deeply eccentric and disappointing to his eyes, as is the fact that such a powerful company is being controlled by mortals with limited perspectives. If he isn't stopped, he will pull every string he can to install more packmates on the board of directors until Pentex is firmly under the control of the Black Spiral Dancers. Makma is not really a legendary character for the Black Spiral Dancers, but his infamy has been carried by the Gaillards of Gaia's tribes for over a millennia now. As his legend goes, Makma was a chief among the dancers sometime between 400 and 800 AD, who rallied the tribe on a mission to break the Weaver's chains on the Wyrm. He would strike at all 13 tribes to take their secrets, but after he succeeded, Luna intervened with a beam of her light that gave chase to Makma and his followers. They tried to take refuge underground, but a mass frenzy overwhelmed them, and Mokma was among the survivors of Luna's judgment. In this pit, Mokma consulted a fellow dancer known as Grimsbane, who imparted a ritual that could pry secrets from the corpses Mokma made of Gaia's champions. With the ritual executed by Grimsbane, the skinned bodies would become a gateway to the Black Spiral Labyrinth, and Mokma would take 4 packmates for the descent. The journey left him as the only survivor at the precipice of his final step, and he would be stopped by a spirit of a past dancer who tried to deter him from going further. Mokma was stubborn and moved past the spirit, only to be devoured by the Eater of Souls. This is not a story that the Black Spiral Dancers tell at their own moods, if only because most have already learned the lesson by now, that the Wyrm is not an ally to them but just an estranged master. This story has also likely undergone serious revisions over the centuries, as the 13 tribes of Gaia would exclude some that would be unlikely to come into conflict with the Black Spiral Dancers, and exclude lost tribes such as the Croatan and Bunyip. Gaillards still keep Mokma's memory alive as a warning of how dangerous the Dancers can be, the futility of their mission, and as a call for unity among the tribes. Mokma's story is recounted in Who's Who Among Werewolves, Garou Saga, which is a collection of stories told by the Garou. A mastermind and champion among the Strontium Howl, Swollen Tongue has had his jaw permanently torn off during his initiation rite, survived getting run over by a tank, rides into combat on a motorcycle, and is always itching to keep things insane. His high-octane life has been kept up by his own exceptional lethality in combat even outside of Krynos form, and his creativity when it comes for the recreational activities of the Strontium Howl, such as the occasional demolition derby. Swollen Tongue is not a particularly complex character, but I love his vibes, so I'll share his legend here. Few Black Spiral Dancers can boast of being in the right place at the right time, quite like White Eyes Ixea, who was an Uktana Philodox when he managed to personally witness the Trinity test. Perhaps it was his split perspective as a Garou, or the result of a swelling morbidity that brought him to the White Sands Proving Ground. But in the writhing fires of the first nuclear detonation, he found enlightenment in the Wyrm's absolute power. He would defect to the Black Spiral Dancers, and he found respect among the dancers who flocked to the test site, enough that he became the master of the rite for the Trinity Hive. Those who seek him out in the Age of Apocalypse will find a decrepit blind man who will still gladly recount his nuclear awakening, which has taken its toll on his body, but seems not to bother him in the slightest. Rarely does he leave the hive, however his wisdom is so vast that he actually keeps contact with some fellow elders among the Uktena. The knowledge will never really help the Garou in any attack they hope to launch against his hive, but often relate to the handling of Banes, as that is a tradition among the Uktena that he has very intimate familiarity with as a dancer. A quick content warning because I want to talk about Paul Laughs the Kill from 5th edition's The Moonlit Path, because his story gives a perspective on how fucked up the Black Spiral Dancers can be, but to be specific about it, I will be discussing a sexually abusive relationship. As one of the few Garou who were picked up after their first change before a Gaian tribe could claim them, Paul Laughs the Kill was once an accomplished and well-respected young man who was reduced to the pack punching bag. His torment culminated in him being offered to a corrupted fertility spirit known as the Mother of Monsters so that he could be raped by it. Paul would harbor the spirit's spawn until they burst from his body, born as barely sentient bits of flesh that would grow into massive hairless humanoids that could match a Garou in Krynos form. His pack had no idea that the Mother of Monsters would provide them with such creatures, or that Paul made a deal with the Mother of Monsters to get revenge. The creatures Paul's pack once mockingly called his sons would tear them apart, as these beasts would now be loyal to Paul and the Mother of Monsters. He found himself the deed name of Laughs the Kill, as he rarely needs to do the killing himself with his sons at his command, but his story would not end with the death of his pack. His sons cannot survive outside of the Umbra for prolonged periods of time without human or Garou flesh to eat, and the power they provide is just too much to relinquish. To this end, Paul frequently kidnaps people and Garou of any tribe to feed to his sons, which increase in number with each time he surrenders himself to the Mother of Monsters. He eventually wants to claim a cairn or hive, so that his sons can survive without constant maintenance, and that mission will bring him into conflict with any Garou. I guess whether or not Paul is a Black Spiral dancer is a little debatable, but he would only ever get the respect of other dancers. Ever since the 1990s, there have been rumors around the British Isles that have started to seep into Gaillard tales across the globe of a dancer with no pack or hive. Garou have called him Dark Star for the way his limbs spread out, Rot Jaw for his disintegrated mouth, Black Tongue for the dry appendage that he rarely uses to speak, and Old Nick for his ominous, wicked presence that speaks not of ruthless carnage, but otherworldly evil. Very few know of his deed name, which he claimed from a song of the Umbra that he chose to learn and plays from the bone flute talisman that always hangs around his neck. His name, and that of his song, is Earth Dirge. This dancer, supposedly a seer or Phyllodox, typically works with hives for only a few nights, but on more than one occasion has he mingled with other supernaturals, or even mortals so long as the agendas are rotten enough. For such dealings, he goes by his old name of Alistair Galbraith, and if one were to research it, they would hear of the only person unaccounted for from an SAS training exercise that went wrong in the 90s, leaving behind a squadron that was supposedly torn apart by animals. No Gaian tribe has ever claimed him, and the Black Spiral dancers hardly know him, which has left legends of his origins to go in wildly different directions. The most infamous of such legends was that he was chosen by Bat itself to dance the Black Spiral ever since his first change, if not before then, and that he is not a true Garou at all. This legend specifically has attracted the attention of Banes, dancers, and Stranger Things that watch him from a distance, following Alistair but never intervening. Since his first change, he has drifted from one place to another to study, fight, and teach, which always results in him killing a few things. This also means that he's more likely to be found in a gore-soaked, ritually prepared heap of trash than an actual hive. He's quite colorful about his violence as well. Alistair's targets are shot, scratched, bitten, strangled, chopped up, and with the dissonant Earth Dirge he can play on his talisman, driven mad by the sight of their own body and the world around them rotting away. His Homid form is fine for clean-cut assassinations, but in Krynos form, a pair of arms sprout from his hips, and he bears a pair of iron hatchets to unleash a relentless whirlwind that slices through anything in his path. Earth Dirge is an original creation of mine and was written for 5th edition, where being a Black Spiral dancer since the first change without intervention by the tribe would be really freaky. Alistair was always an evil bastard, and his creation is an omen of the coming apocalypse, so someone should probably kill him. His rules will be in the description. Now, those are just the big problems that should be expected in just about any Werewolf the Apocalypse chronicle. But, as is my commitment to give you the stuff other World of Darkness channels might not provide, let's get into the weirder, more obscure servants of the Wyrm. I'm only covering the werewolf-specific ones, so no Malfian Asandi, cool though they may be for a crossover chronicle. Also, most of the threats I mention here are supplemented by rules for using these threats in 5th edition Werewolf the Apocalypse, which you can find in the description of this video. When a daddy vampire puts his vitae into a mommy werewolf, there is a slight chance that the werewolf mutates into an abomination. These monsters are borderline mythical, especially for the vampires who have a deeply limited understanding of the Garou, but the warriors of Gaia understand that to be afflicted with their curse of bloodthirst and undeath is a fate far worse than death. Abominations retain the ability to step sideways and shapeshift, but they are scorned by most spirits, which cuts them off from using many gifts. They may instead work with Banes, who will be less likely to judge their nature, or they can study the vampiric powers of disciplines. The acceptance of a male Jinn Incarna can allow an abomination to keep its sanity in exchange for pledging absolute allegiance to it. Being an abomination is a miserable state of existence, as the Garou completely loses their connection to Gaia, so most become mindless beasts and the rest become cunning beasts, often mingling with the most deranged and secretive vampire cults or the Black Spiral Dancers. To borrow a phrase from my initial coverage in the first World of Darkness Iceberg video, literally no one likes them because they're violent monsters with no regard for the masquerade, and on the wrong side of the fight to push back the apocalypse. Beyond the Garou, the vampiric embrace takes different effects for the Fera, and I'll run through them quickly for the sake of completion. The Ajaba Were-Hyenas and the Goral Werebears are the only Fera who can undergo the embrace with the same loose stability seen with the Garou. I accidentally missed that the Goral could also become similar abominations when covering the topic in the World of Darkness Iceberg, and I would like to apologize for that error. The Ananasi Were-Spiders are completely immune to the effects of vampiric vitae. This is supposedly also true for the Kamazaz Werebats and the Gronder Wereboars, but I found this when doing the first stage of research on the White Wolf Wiki, and no sources provided for these claims. Since those two are lost breeds, I'll leave it at that. The Bastet Werecats experience constant mental degradation over a few months until becoming a permanently frenzied beast. The Korax Wereravens and Makole Werecrocodiles burst into flames at the first sunrise, even if they are not directly exposed to Helios' light. The Kitsune Werefoxes, Naga Weresnakes, and Nuisha Werecoyotes all simply die after the embrace. The Kitsune specifically erupt into a pillar of flame that executes them and anything within arm's reach. The Ratkin undergo constant necrosis until death after the embrace, and the Rakia Weresharks instantly enter a permanent frenzy after the embrace. The Garou do not have a confident understanding of their shapeshifter brethren, and some are proudly incorrect about them. But anyone who has gotten to know them might attest that they are servants of Gaia as much as the Garou are. Some might fall to the Wyrm, and we will get to them, but the Garou fall too, so they can't really posture about that. And this isn't an incorrect understanding, at least for much of history, but the tides are turning against Gaia, and in its final moments before she let out her agonized howl throughout the Umbra, something was taken from her. On our side of reality, there are groups of people who drift from one place to another, sometimes anchoring themselves to a city or a job, but it's not their purpose. They go to an underpass late at night to beat and kill the unhoused. They stand over the underpass, dropping heavy bricks and stones on passing cars to kill their drivers. They linger in alleyways looking for someone to drag into the darkness so that they can be raped without any witnesses. They storm into people's houses, brutally killing whoever and whatever they might find. It's all vile, but they never feel more alive than what they let loose on the undeserving, and better yet, they do it together. The Wyrm might have seen all of this uncaringly, because things have always been this way in its infinite perspective. But through its compound eyes, Fly saw a kinship with the kind of attitude behind these individuals, how they can take all that they can without consequences or hesitation. Its servants in Pentex certainly followed these standards, but Fly sought expansion with the plunder ripped from the heart of Gaia. As oil spilled out into the sea in quantities never before seen, Fly rewarded its servants with a brand new weapon to stamp out the stragglers. Those individuals I mentioned before are still out there, unrepentant and violent, but a few of them have a new perspective on things. In collective transformations of between 3 and 5 people who already indulge in violence together, they are transformed into Bazuli, with each group known as a plague. Some of their acts are now made in service to dark powers, and a few acts are more complicated but still crude, such as dumping their victims' bodies into a water tank to poison the people who rely on it. Vassals of Fly have guided them to gatherings, such as the one where they uncovered their name of Bazuli, or to Pentex subsidiaries, where they find stable employment with cultists and Fomori who understand what they are. Plagues of Bazuli have even mingled with the Black Spiral Dancers, though they do not share the same esotericism of the fallen Garou. They might still prefer their fists, knives, claw hammers, and baseball bats, but they are capable of much more. Their bodies can dissolve into swarms of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of flies that can rip through the flesh of humans and Garou alike. They even have their own war form, a gangly husk of dry, rotting flesh, infested by flies. It is much more than it appears, and given their uncanny synchronicity, more than once has a Bazuli plague brought down an unprepared Garou pack, occasionally with the help of Banes, Fomori, or even Pentex first teams and Black Spiral Dancers. No one can count on them to fight fair, as they take what they please by whatever means are most fulfilling to them. If throughout this section you wondered, hey Iggy, what the fuck are you talking about? That's because these are another original creation for our 5th edition War of the Apocalypse, designed as antagonists and as an alternate foil for the Garou, with their mechanics in the description of this video. I hope they provide a midpoint between using Fomori and Black Spiral Dancers, leaning into a more visceral, intimate kind of horror regarding the battle for Gaia and the brutality humans are capable of, with or without the kind of monolithic institutional support we see in Pentex. A Bazuli plague can certainly work as a group of cops, football hooligans, rich kids, misogynistic pigs hiding on Telegram forums, or even neglected delinquents because you know that I had a Clockwork Orange in mind when creating these monsters, along with several real headlines. That hopefully gives storytellers new stages to set conflicts, and even catch veterans of the game off guard. I know that you could probably do these guys as Fomori, but making them shifters of Fly is meant to cement its dominance in the Age of Apocalypse, and really lean into the surface level bleakness of 5th edition's take on Werewolf, which can actually be resolved through pure rage without much conflict of conscience. The Chulorvia is a semi-spiritual infection that originates from the deepest waters of our planet, and has been troubling a few surface dwellers as of late due to contact by the Rokea and deep-sea divers. Those familiar with Mage Ascension may also be interested to hear that the Void Engineers Convention have also been studying the Chulorvia disease. Only humans and cephalopods can become Kraken-born infected, who are pulled into a hive mind to act on whatever agenda the Chulorvia act on. Whatever that might be is technically unclear, but it's probably some kind of world domination. The Pharaoh do sense some kind of wormish corruption from them, but they haven't really been seen skipping daisies with Fomori or Black Spiral Dancers. Human infectees are known as Enfolded, and they are little more than grunts in the grand scheme of things, blending in with humans until their physical transformations, such as beaks on their faces or suckers on the palms of their hands, become too obvious. Unfortunately, humans also include kinfolk, vampiric blood thralls, sorcerers, and even mages, which can definitely prove more troublesome than some unlucky diver. Greater mental faculties are permitted to the Petriani, which are infected cephalopods that physically stand out for their extra tentacles and universal ability to camouflage. By attaching themselves to humans or Enfolded, they can puppet the body, and since the Chulorvia infection can only spread to humans and cephalopods, the control of a Petrianos can allow other creatures to be exploited for the Chulorvia agenda, including supernatural ones thanks to their semi-spiritual nature. At the top of this hierarchy are the extremely rare few Enfolded who have gone on to live for centuries, if not millennia. These Chulorvia elders become eldritch nightmares, or tapped into the collective memory of the Chulorvia, where the past and future seemingly become one, going far beyond the existence of humanity. From the bottom of the seas, elders take charge over any Chulorvia activity around them, though their actual significance to the greater agenda is uncertain. They may be avatars for a greater malignance behind the infection, or not much more than naturally occurring beacons for the greater hive mind. If you are listening to all of this and asking yourself, "Where's my Malpheus? Where are my spirals?" I should mention that the Chulorvia were initially introduced in Blood Dim Tides, a classic source book for all game blinds, and they were brought back in the 20th anniversary book of the Wyrm. I'm mentioning them here for the sake of completeness, but they are very atypical antagonists for Werewolf's whole vibe. Garou are rarely ever mentioned in the explanations for the Chulorvia, in favor of the Rokea, which makes a lot more sense as they can actually take the battle to the Krakenborn a lot better than the Garou can. Personally, these monsters are more suited to a game like Mage the Ascension, and if anyone's familiar with Breva Alphabusa's Norfolk Wizard game, I'm pretty sure the weird guys in the smiling bag from Chapter 3 are enfolded and they're being used in a Nephandic angle rather than a Wyrmish angle, which has worked pretty well for them. Now I need to get back on track. When I spoke about how Pentex might not be the right human antagonist for all Werewolf Chronicles, that's where Wyrm cults come in. It's very easy to wrap your head around a Bane finding an audience of vulnerable mortals and manipulating them into servitude. That can be a good source of Fomori agents or power, and cults in service to the Wyrm or its servants have been a source of conflict for Garou basically since they were created. I can certainly imagine how spirits of the wild might want to manipulate mortals, though in a less clear sense than organized cults, and the Weaver typically prefers possessed drones to ensure its will. But humanity have a potential for rot that Banes absolutely love, which is why they go after humans. Naturally, these cults can be even more varied than Pentex subsidiaries, and since I'm on the appendix of this video, I will cover only 3. As the sort of antagonists for the Rage Across New York sourcebook, the 7th generation is a child trafficking ring that practices occult rituals in service to the Defiler Wyrm. They see trauma as a kind of spiritual poison that spreads silently throughout a community, so its interests are in traumatizing children, manipulating society to make coming forward about the abuse its own transgression, and normalizing this evil so that it can persist beyond the actions of the 7th generation. Cycles of abuse and all that. Outside of Pentex, this is probably the most powerful Wyrm cult one can find. The cult itself is split into 5 divisions, internally referred to as castes, which are government, business, medical, snatchers, and warriors. It takes no profound wisdom to correctly guess what each of the castes do when their goal is clearly laid out, but their methods are made more complicated when you consider the mix of sorcery and authority the 7th generation boasts, along with the occasional Fomor among their ranks. Also, Andrew Jackson was a member of the 7th generation, and in a moment of metaplot that I find kind of annoying, the 7th generation were kind of written out of the setting when it was targeted and destroyed by King Albrecht. This was recounted in the Silver Record, which is one of those in-universe supplement books, but of course nothing really stops you from ignoring that text and using them in your own chronicles. For something much smaller in scope, the Heralds of Catharsis are the inner circle of the Winners Meeting self-help group. Unsurprisingly, the Winners Meeting is a pretentious lot, but their language has been manipulated by the cult that has been seated in the group. They speak of seeking catharsis by settling scores with those who have done you wrong, a simple reflection of the bane that has manipulated the group into worshipping it and its own desires. Long ago, there was an old and powerful hill spirit that suffered underneath humanity, its trees and grass stripped from its surface in favor of buildings and pavement. To gather some mortal followers, it took advantage of its form to appear as an angel to the most vulnerable members of the Winners Meeting, and ask for sacrifices, specifically from people that wronged them, though Catharsis isn't too picky to reject the lives of the undeserving. It fed on these ritual sacrifices and the devotion of this inner circle, with some of its members even becoming Fomori or at least possessed. On the Umbral side, Catharsis has been stoking resentment among spirits, and has rallied lesser banes to its side, specifically wormholes with which Catharsis hopes to cross the gauntlet and fully manifest in the physical world. The Heralds of Catharsis are an antagonist in The Coming Destruction, a 5th edition chronicle book, and if they sound kinda simple, that's because it's mostly written for a beginner pack as an introduction to worm cults. Doesn't mean they're bad though. Essentially, the pen text for the Wild West setting, the Enlightened Society of the Weeping Moon is a secret mystic order that attracts the powerful, wealthy, and deeply bored. Its initial creation in the 19th century was the product of manipulations by the Urdworm of Lies Swilak, as a subversion of Garu mythology, and its beliefs paint Luna as a force of cold cleansing, its tears a purifying force for an apocalypse they hope to see with the moon descending on the earth. Some other twists of faith include its members using social roles based on the phases of the moon, akin to Garu auspices, and viewing shape changers as wayward children of the moon, both chosen and heretical in nature. They also have real power without succumbing to the fate of a Fomor, as they receive guidance from Banes, Black Spiral Dancers, and sorcerers with an interest in the Wyrm. Their combination of sorcery and authority makes them a cleaner threat than Pentex, but their biggest weakness came from them being a cult in the literal sense. A failed doomsday prophecy tore through the group in the early 20th century, and it has been a shell of its former self ever since then, remembered more so by the Garu of the Americas than other servants of the Wyrm, but they never actually died off. Following up on the mention in Frontier Secrets that the descendants of the original society would hold onto their old writings, Wormtide reintroduced the Enlightened Society of the Weeping Moon as a minor threat to the Garu, still readily exploited by cunning servants of the Wyrm, and boasting a better understanding of the Umbra than most other cults. They've also been able to recruit new members with promises of wealth and enlightenment, neither of which has lost any value in the last 100 years. I didn't make an enemy template for the cult since that's quite broad, but I did add a trio of Wormish sorcerers that I encountered in a Hunter Chronicle, which were tied to a cult. They can use a lot of Fomori-like abilities, but retain full autonomy, and their rules are in the description. Just as the Garu have the Black Spiral Dancers, the Changing Breeds have their own fallen brethren. I did originally plan to discuss them here, however, in my research, I believe that covering them as usual would leave a lot of context on the table, because specific knowledge on them is one of those things I'm not assuming of my viewers. I hope to discuss the Changing Breeds in the future, and in a video like that, I would be able to discuss the Fallen Pharaoh in a more cohesive fashion. For now, I will say that the only Changing Breeds with specifically and officially laid out Wormish counterparts are the Ananasi, Bastet, Korax, Bokole, Nuisha, Radkin, and Rokea, along with the extinct Kamazots and Grandeur. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned the Skull Pigs in this video, that's because of their connection to the Grandeur. That leaves the Ajaba, Gural, and Kitsune, along with the Apis, without any Wormish counterpart. For now, those interested can look towards the 20th Anniversary Changing Breeds book for details on the Fallen Pharaoh, while the 2nd edition Book of the Wyrm has a much more limited but still valuable overview on them. Quite possibly the most enigmatic threat for the Garu, Inquisitors are entities, and entities might be the only apt descriptor, that seem to be interested in the Wyrm for their own agendas. Since they interrogate other servants of the Wyrm for their information, this puts them into conflict with just about everyone from Pentex to the Black Spiral Dancers. But they don't understand the Inquisitors any better than the Garu do, and these alien creatures are also quite capable of handling themselves. Inquisitors are faceless humanoids with jet black skin, typically dressed well, and will frequently use technology such as cars or firearms as needed. Where they're getting these things is anybody's guess. Their preferred means of interrogation comes naturally, in the form of probes that can pop out of their fingertips and stab into a subject's head to siphon information. Like the Chilorvia, I feel like these guys fit Mage better, but the Inquisitors were introduced for Werewolf rather than being a universally compatible monster that got sectioned off to Werewolf, so what do I know? Skin Dancers and Stolen Moons are two iterations on the same idea of what are essentially counterfeit Garou. At the foundational level with how the Skin Dancers were initially introduced, they are humans who have skinned 5 Garou pelts taken from their Krynos form, and have used the so-called ritual of Sacred Rebirth to gain the ability to shapeshift. Eventually, the 5 pelt requirement got recognized as rightfully absurd, and was nerfed down to only needing 1. But the whole thing is based on one of the oldest folklore beliefs on how werewolves were created. Due to the wormish origins of the ritual and its requirements, Skin Dancers can really only work with Banes for gifts, which pulls them deeper into the enemy's embrace. Over the classic books for Werewolf the Apocalypse, the Skin Dancers got to develop as a weird sort of tribe. Much to my simultaneous chagrin and amusement, Skin Dancers are a product of the last century, and the infamous Samuel Hate. I gave a summary of this little freak in the World of Darkness iceberg, and if I were to talk about him again, it would be in a dedicated video. Just to know that there was a very bitter kinfolk who found the ritual of Sacred Rebirth, used it on himself, and started to rally other bastards into his movement, which persisted long after his death. The Skin Dancer got a sort of patron spirit in the form of Minotaur, which is based on a very weird interpretation of the Greek myth, but his position is threatened by the spirit of Tick, and this whole deal is detailed in the 20th anniversary Skinner book. In 5th edition, Skin Dancers are reintroduced as Stolen Moons, walking back the association with a piece of Navajo folklore, and broadening the nature of the counterfeit Garou, though I believe some of the limitations presented in the core rulebook are less than helpful for telling good stories. Anyways, Samuel Hate, presented as the Skinner, is still more or less canon, as is his infamous ritual that passed down from one stolen moon to another. On the other hand, a mortal may instead use a ritual that involves eating the heart of a Garou, or even suffer a curse at the hands of powerful spirits that turns them into an uncontrollable beast of rage. This actually gives room for those real deal werewolves who transform under the full moon and go into an uncontrollable, indiscriminate frenzy on the countryside that is half remembered in the morning, because fuck the Garou and fuck the Urasa too, real werewolves. The Garou perspective on these individuals has never really changed though. Skinners and the like kill werewolves either out of envy or sport, while the cursed probably deserve their fate to some extent, but Banes or not, the spirits who create them are acting recklessly. Attitudes towards them range from revulsion to deep discomfort for the Garou, and are more or less their responsibility. On the topic of wormish counterfeit Garou, I really want to mention that vampires have their own means of creating them. Because of how deeply scared many vampires are of werewolves, the counterfeit equivalent is a pretty good deterrent. Whether or not they cause delirium is up in the air, but I'm pretty sure they would. There isn't too much more to say about thunderworms that I didn't already say when explaining the Trinity Hive. They are big worms between 30 and 400 feet or so in length that were born from the first nuclear detonation and might be able to reproduce asexually with eggs. If you're curious on what kind of werewolf stories would call for a big worm, thunderworms are pretty clear-cut big bads that might be defended by cults or black spiral dancers. If you just want to use the thunderworms by themselves, the monster's presentation takes some obvious influences from the Tremor series and its graboid monsters, so that kind of countryside tormenting is what they're up to. I guess they're really big, but I don't really know what to say about these guys. The only unnatural part of them is that they exist at all. They're just big worms, and that's okay. I spoke of these mysterious servants of the worm before in the second part of the World of Darkness iceberg, but to reintroduce them, the Vujonka are humanoid creatures with powerful psychic capabilities and some familiarity with the worm, at least more intimately than the Inquisitors. They only work with Banes and Fomori, which they are capable of exercising some control over, use advanced technology such as laser weapons, and live in subterranean cities from which no Garou who dares to enter returns alive. As I said in the Iceberg video, and much like the Inquisitors, these monsters serve as a free space kind of mystery for storytellers to run wild with. However, I would like to present an additional detail. In the Chronicle of the Black Labyrinth, we hear an account of old engagements between the White Howlers and subterranean serpent folk with alien faces. They were well versed in the ways of the Balanced Wyrm, and supposedly supported the movement of Fomori among invading Romans. Perhaps these serpent folk were ancient, primitive Fujunka. However, such an explanation only illuminates so much. An ancient foe of the northern Garus, such as the Fianna, Geta Fenris, and Wendigo tribes, the Volog have been given many names, such as Fomorians and Jotnar, for the stories of their defeat at the hands of ancient Garou. These worm-worshipping giants were chased into the northern polar regions before disappearing, and the Time of Judgment Apocalypse book presents these monsters as making the reprisal for the final battle against Gaia's defenders. These big guys are pretty simple, as they're just humanoids with various appearances, typically deformed ones or incorporating animal features, but are generally about as large as a Garou in Kranos form, and can match them in combat. They generally have some kind of large weapon and know a gift or two. If the Volog have a culture, it's not at all understood by the Garou, and the gear they adorn themselves in incorporates otherworldly materials or bears some passing resemblance to the apparel of ancient human cultures. Volog are presented as something that just shows up to fuck up everything, so there is very little fluff for them, but I think they're kinda cool. To understand the Zamei, one must accept the idea that dragons were a thing until they were essentially chased out of the collective understanding of reality. This is very much a Meiji Ascension thing, but once we're past that, just look at these monsters as being something that wasn't corrupted by the Wyrm, and now is, and that should clear some things up a little bit. So, the Zamei are 7 ancient dragons of the Wyrm that were awakened by a less ancient vampire known as Baba Yaga to wreak havoc across Russia some centuries ago. The Silver Fangs, in collaboration with mages among their kinfolk and many other tribes, waged a war against these beasts that killed one dragon and sealed the other 6 away. In World War II, one of these dragons was awakened by the conflict and was rediscovered by Baba Yaga, who now seeks to awaken the remaining 5 Zamei. Even worse is that the rites of binding by the Silver Fangs of yore are weakening over time, so the Garou must either reinforce the binding, or better yet, kill them before their master picks them up. The dead one was named Sharkala, but the other 6 are Goloku, Grigornis, Iliana, Ustarin, Shazer, and Shavero. Each one has different powers, and all present a formidable challenge to the Garou. They rest in the Umbra, but are capable of tearing a hole through the gauntlet, and that rift goes straight to Malpheus, ensuring that they never fight alone. Should they be released, they require the supernatural energy found in cairns and other places of power in order to survive, which means that if the Garou don't take the battle to the Zamei will take the battle to them. Now, I did talk about Baba Yaga, which is part of a whole moment in the classic meta plot that was honestly really stupid, so one can certainly substitute her for something more related to Werewolf the Apocalypse and its creative elements. The obvious first choice would be replacing her role with that of the Black Spiral Dancers, but the Malfian of Fondi, who are generally aware of the Wyrm, can make for a decent alternative if you still want to keep the mage connection. And I know that's not exactly everything, but I think that's enough. Thank you all so much for watching, because this was a pretty massive undertaking. Speaking of antagonists for werewolves, I'm not really sold on the premise of Werewolf the Forsaken, but the creation of this video drew me to read up on stuff like the Idigim and Giriel, which are really cool. The Pure Tribes especially got my attention, and though I don't have the knowledge to cover them, I really love their deal. In some ways, I like them more than the Black Spiral Dancers, but Forsaken's actual analog for them, the Balehounds, are much less interesting to me. If any of you are interested in learning what I've been reading about, Holden Berry's a YouTuber who uploads Vampire the Requiem actual play, along with the occasional explainer for Chronicles of Darkness, has a video for Worlds Forsaken in the works, and I'm really looking forward to it. He really does their Chronicles of Darkness justice, and I highly recommend his channel even to those unfamiliar with that setting. Now, before I go into the typical outro fare, I also want to talk about the stuff that got me here, to the end of this video. I'd like to shout out the album Flesh Stays Together by Dying Wish, and the song The Lucid Dream by the Acacia Strain. These two musical works, which are metalcore and deathcore respectively, are some atypical picks for music that gets me into the Werewolf the Apocalypse headspace, and have been lovely companions for me in the creation of this video. I cannot recommend them enough for any fellow metalheads who may also be fans of this lovely TTRPG. Also, I once again must thank Elsie McScribbles for the original illustrations in this video, and her page is in the description. She almost exclusively draws anime women and Yuri, but she is somewhat familiar with the World of Darkness, and with fair payment, I convinced her to draw the lovely freaks you've seen here. Please show her some support, especially since she has such a small following at this time. Now, a bit back, I said I wanted to dissect the Amazing Digital Circus web series. That's proven to be a lovely puzzle box for analysis so long as I ignore the community surrounding it, and that will likely be the next video. Afterwards, I hope you don't mind things getting a little bureaucratic around here. Until then, you can subscribe to this channel for more nonsense on the spooky to strange spectrum, or follow my Blue Sky for regular updates on videos, unrelated projects, and misadventures. There is also my 5th edition Hunter the Reckoning supplement, additional player options, which is on Storyteller's Vault, and I have an affiliate link for it in the description. I have been Ignacio Vitaliz, thank you for watching, and may the night treat you right. So, on page 177 of the Time of Judgment Apocalypse book, there is a thing about how the Exalted setting came before the World of Darkness, and I should have really mentioned that in the iceberg stuff, but I didn't, and I'm sorry about that. Here's to less skimming in the future with these more focused videos.